Most people do not look tired on the outside. They look functional. They smile when needed. They answer messages. They handle responsibilities. They move through the day like everything is under control. But beneath that surface, the nervous system is often still running like it never got the message that the danger has passed. The body is in bed, but the mind is still on guard. The eyes are closed, but something inside remains awake, scanning, bracing, remembering, preparing. And after a while, this way of living starts to feel normal. The tension in the chest, the tightness in the jaw, the endless loop of thoughts, the strange feeling of being exhausted and restless at the same time. Not because something is wrong with you, but because your system has been carrying too much for too long, without enough silence to recover. No one really teaches us how to calm the inner world. We are taught how to survive pressure, but not how to come down from it. We are taught how to keep going, but not how to feel safe enough to truly rest. The Stoics understood something most people still miss. A disturbed mind cannot lead a peaceful life, not because life is always hard, but because the mind keeps replaying what it fears, what it lost, what it cannot control. And the longer this continues, the more the body begins to believe that stress is home. But the Stoics also knew that peace can be trained, that the mind can learn to loosen its grip, that thoughts can be seen without being followed, that the body can be guided back into stillness, one breath, one release, one moment of surrender at a time. Tonight, this meditation is your return, not to perfection, not to numbness, but to balance, to steadiness, to a quieter relationship with your own mind. For the next 4 hours, you are not here to fix your whole life. You are here to let the dust settle, to let the heart slow down, to let the nervous system remember what calm feels like, and maybe, before sleep takes you, to feel something rare and deeply needed, the sense that for this moment you are safe, you are held, and you no longer have to carry everything alone. And as the mind begins to slow, something deeper starts to rise, not noise, but memory, not the kind you see clearly, but the kind your body has been holding in silence all along. Because rest is not just about closing your eyes, it is about meeting what has been waiting underneath. There is a quiet agreement your body made long before you were aware of it. Every time you felt something but chose to move on too quickly, every time you swallowed anger, ignored sadness, or brushed past fear, your mind said, "Keep going," but your body said, "I will hold it for you." And it did. Not out of weakness, not out of failure, but out of loyalty. The nervous system is not designed to forget. It is designed to protect. So when an emotion is not fully felt, not fully released, it does not disappear. It changes form. It settles into the muscles. It lingers in the breath. It tightens in places you do not pay attention to. And over time, these small, unprocessed moments begin to stack quietly in the background of your life. That tight feeling in your chest that comes out of nowhere, the way your shoulders rise without you noticing, the sudden wave of unease in a moment that should feel normal. These are not random. These are signals, not problems, but messages. Your body is remembering what your mind tried to skip. And the truth is, most people were never taught how to process emotion. They were taught how to manage it, to control it, to hide it, to stay strong, to not make a scene, to keep functioning no matter what was happening inside. And while that may have helped in the moment, it came with a cost. Because emotions do not need to be solved, they need to be felt. When they are not, the nervous system stays slightly activated, like a door that was never fully closed. And even when life becomes calm, the body continues to act as if something is still unresolved. This is why rest can feel difficult, not because you are doing something wrong, but because your system has unfinished conversations stored within it. The Stoics understood this in a different way. They believed that suffering grows when we resist what is already there, that the more we push something away, the more power it gains beneath the surface. And that clarity comes not from controlling the mind, but from allowing it to reveal itself without fear. Tonight, this is where the shift begins. Not by forcing yourself to dig into every past moment, not by trying to analyze everything you have felt, but by giving your body something it has been missing: permission. Permission to soften, permission to stop holding everything so tightly, permission to feel without needing to explain. As you lie here, there is nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to chase, nothing you need to solve. The work is not in doing more. The work is in allowing more space. Start noticing the areas of your body that feel slightly tense, not with judgment, just with awareness. The jaw that holds a little pressure, the neck that feels a bit stiff, the chest that does not fully expand with each breath. These are not flaws. These are places where something has been stored. And instead of trying to release them all at once, simply acknowledge them. This is where the nervous system begins to change. Not through force, but through recognition. Because what is seen can finally begin to let go. The body does not need you to relive everything. It just needs to know that it no longer has to carry it alone, that it is safe enough in this moment to loosen its grip. And safety is not created by external silence. It is created by internal allowance. So let the breath become softer, not deeper. Let it come and go without effort. Let your attention rest gently without trying to control where it goes. If a thought appears, let it pass like something drifting across the surface. You do not need to follow it. You do not need to stop it. You only need to notice that it is there and that it can leave. This is how the contract begins to shift. For so long, your body has been holding what your mind could not process. But tonight, you are no longer asking it to carry everything in silence. You are meeting it halfway, not with pressure, but with presence. And as this continues, something subtle begins to happen. The grip softens, the background tension lowers. The sense of urgency starts to fade. Not because everything is solved, but because the system no longer feels alone in holding it. This is the beginning of real rest. Not the kind that comes from distraction, not the kind that comes from exhaustion, but the kind that comes from finally allowing what has been stored to be acknowledged, without resistance. And as the body feels this shift, even in small ways, it starts to trust again. Trust that it can release. Trust that it does not have to stay on guard. Trust that, for this moment, it is allowed to be still. And that is where the deeper reset begins. And as the body slowly learns that it does not have to hold everything so tightly, another pattern begins to reveal itself. Not in the muscles this time, but in the habits of the mind. Because even when the body is ready to rest, the mind often keeps feeding on the day, replaying it, analyzing it, holding on to it long after it has ended. There is a quiet habit most people carry into the night without noticing. They bring the entire day with them into bed. Every conversation, every mistake, every unfinished task, every moment that did not go the way they wanted. It all follows them, not because it is necessary, but because the mind has learned to stay attached. And this is where something powerful begins to shift. There is a practice that does not require effort, control, or force. It simply requires a different relationship with what has already happened. It is the ability to step away internally, to stop feeding the mind with the same material, to allow the day to end without dragging it into the next moment. This is emotional fasting, not avoidance, not suppression, not pretending nothing happened, but a quiet decision to stop consuming the emotional weight of the day once it has passed. Throughout the day, the mind is constantly reacting. It judges, compares, worries, predicts. It attaches meaning to everything. A small comment becomes a lingering thought. A mistake becomes a story. A delay becomes frustration. And without realizing it, the mind keeps replaying these moments as if they still need attention. But most of them do not. They have already happened. The problem is not the event. The problem is the continued engagement with it. Emotional fasting begins when you stop refeeding those moments. As the night settles in, there is an opportunity to step back from the noise of the day, not by pushing it away, but by no longer participating in it. Thoughts may still appear, memories may still surface, but instead of following them, you simply let them pass without adding anything to them. No commentary, no judgment, no continuation. This is where many people get it wrong. They believe that detachment means ignoring or burying emotions, but that only stores them deeper. True detachment is not about blocking what you feel. It is about allowing it to exist without giving it more energy than it needs. If something felt heavy during the day, it is okay that it left a trace. The body has already acknowledged it. The mind does not need to keep repeating it. Think of it like this. During the day, you have been eating emotional input constantly. Conversations, responsibilities, expectations, reactions. By the time night comes, the system is full. But instead of allowing digestion, most people continue to feed it. They scroll, they think, they replay, they analyze, and the system never gets a break. Emotional fasting is the pause. It is the moment where you stop adding more, where you allow what is already there to settle naturally. Just like the body does not need more food before sleep, the mind does not need more stimulation or emotional engagement. It needs stillness. So as you lie here, begin to notice what is trying to pull your attention back into the day. A thought about something unfinished, a replay of a conversation, a quiet worry about tomorrow. Instead of following it, simply recognize it, and then leave it there. You do not need to resolve it right now. You do not need to understand it fully. You do not need to fix it before sleep. This is where the nervous system begins to trust that it can rest without everything being completed. Because the truth is, life is never fully complete. There will always be something left undone. And if the mind waits for everything to be perfect before it rests, it will never truly relax. The Stoics practiced this in their own way. They would reflect on the day, not to judge it, but to acknowledge it, and then they would let it go. They understood that holding on to every detail only creates more disturbance. That peace comes from knowing when to engage and when to release. Tonight, you are practicing that release. You are allowing the day to be enough as it was. Not perfect, not complete, but finished. There is nothing from today that needs to follow you into this moment, unless you choose to carry it. And for now, you can set it down. Gently, without resistance, without force. As the mind begins to slow its need to revisit everything, the body follows. The breath becomes softer. The tension reduces without effort. The background noise starts to fade. This is not because everything is solved. It is because you are no longer feeding what keeps it active. And in that quiet space, something new begins to emerge. A sense of distance from the constant stream of thoughts. A sense of relief from the need to engage with every feeling. A sense of calm that does not depend on the day being perfect. This is the effect of emotional fasting. It creates space where there was once constant activity. It allows the mind to settle without being forced. It gives the nervous system a signal it rarely receives, that it is allowed to stop. And as this continues, even for a few moments, the system begins to reset. Not through effort, not through control, but through the simple act of not adding more. And in that space, rest becomes possible in a way it has not been before, because for the first time in a while, nothing is being carried forward. Everything is being left exactly where it belongs, in the past, where it no longer needs to be held. And as the mind learns to stop feeding on the day, something even deeper begins to loosen. Not just the thoughts, but the identity behind them. Because what keeps the mind active is not only what happened, it is who you believe you must continue to be. There is a quiet pressure most people carry without ever questioning it. The pressure to remain the same person they were during the day, the responsible one, the strong one, the one who has to figure things out, the one who holds everything together. And even when the day ends, that role does not switch off. It follows into the night, keeping the mind alert, as if there is still something to protect. But there is a truth the Stoics understood that most people never practice. Peace begins when you stop holding on to who you think you are. Not forever, not in a dramatic way, but just for this moment. There is a version of you that exists only during the day, the one shaped by expectations, responsibilities, conversations, and reactions. That version is useful. It helps you function. It helps you move through the world. But it is not the only version of you. And more importantly, it is not the one that needs to rest. When the night comes, there is no need to carry that identity any further. The titles, the roles, the expectations, they are not needed here. They can be set down just like the thoughts of the day. This is where identity shedding begins. Not by rejecting who you are, but by loosening your grip on it, because the nervous system does not just respond to events. It responds to the identity you attach to those events. If you see yourself as someone who must always be in control, the body stays alert. If you see yourself as someone who cannot fail, the mind keeps analyzing. If you see yourself as someone who must solve everything, the thoughts never stop. But what happens when, for a moment, you become no one? Not a role, not a label, not a collection of expectations, just awareness, just presence. This is not emptiness in a negative sense. It is a release, a temporary freedom from everything you have been carrying as me. And in that space, something unexpected happens. The pressure disappears, because there is no one left to carry it. As you lie here, begin to notice the subtle ways identity shows up in your thoughts. The voice that says, "I should have done better." The voice that says, "I need to figure this out." The voice that says, "This is who I am." These are not just thoughts. They are attachments to a version of yourself that feels responsible for everything. And for tonight, you do not need to be that version. You do not need to perform. You do not need to improve. You do not need to defend or explain or solve. You can simply be here, without a role. The Stoics practiced a form of this without calling it by name. They would remind themselves that everything external, including reputation and identity, is temporary, that clinging to it creates disturbance, and that true calm comes from stepping back into something deeper than personality, something that is not shaken by events. That deeper place is what you are returning to now. A place where you are not defined by what happened today. A place where you are not limited by the expectations placed on you. A place where you are simply aware, without needing to be anything more. Let the idea of who you are soften. You do not need to hold on to it so tightly. If a thought comes that tries to pull you back into a role, notice it and let it pass. If a feeling comes that tries to remind you of a responsibility, acknowledge it and let it rest. You are not abandoning your life. You are simply stepping out of it for a moment. And in that moment, the nervous system receives a powerful signal. There is nothing to protect right now. There is nothing to prove. There is nothing to maintain. And with that signal, the body begins to release tension in a way that effort cannot achieve. Because tension is often tied to identity, to the idea that something must be held together at all times. But when there is no one holding it together, everything naturally begins to settle. This is where calm starts to deepen. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped being the version of yourself that was resisting it. And in this space, there is a quiet kind of relief. A relief that does not come from solving problems. A relief that comes from stepping outside of them completely. For now, you are not the person with responsibilities. You are not the person with unfinished tasks. You are not the person defined by past actions or future expectations. You are simply here, breathing, existing, aware. And that is enough. As this continues, even gently, the mind begins to quiet in a different way. Not because it has been silenced, but because the one who was attached to every thought is no longer holding on. And in that release, something deeper becomes possible. A calm that is not dependent on identity. A stillness that does not require effort. A sense of being that is lighter, quieter, and finally, at rest. And as the need to hold on to identity begins to fade, something more physical starts to come into view. Not thoughts this time, but the quiet places where the body has been holding on without asking for attention. Because even when the mind lets go, the body can still remain in patterns it learned long ago. There are areas that carry more than they should, and most people never notice them until the tension becomes too loud to ignore. The jaw that stays slightly clenched, even when there is nothing to defend. The eyes that never fully soften, always alert, always scanning. The breath that moves just enough to keep going, but never enough to truly relax. These are not random habits. They are signals from a nervous system that has been trained to stay ready. Ready for what? It often does not even know anymore. This is what makes the tension invisible. It becomes normal. So normal that you can go through an entire day without realizing that your teeth are pressed together, that your forehead is slightly tightened, that your breath is shallow, as if something is always just about to happen. And when night comes, these patterns do not simply disappear. They continue, quietly, until the body forgets what it feels like to be fully at ease. But the body does not need force to change. It does not need to be corrected or controlled. It only needs something it rarely receives: gentle awareness. Not the kind that tries to fix everything, but the kind that simply notices. Start with the jaw. There is a subtle habit of holding there, often tied to unspoken words, restrained reactions, or moments where something needed to be said but was not. The jaw learns to carry that restraint. It tightens as a form of control. But right now, there is nothing to control. So instead of trying to open it or move it, simply bring your attention there. Notice the pressure. Notice how it feels without labeling it as good or bad. And then allow a small space to form, not by effort, but by permission, as if you are silently telling the body, you do not need to hold this anymore. The release may be small, almost unnoticeable, but that is enough, because the body responds more to safety than to force. Then move to the eyes. Even with the lids closed, there is often tension behind them, a quiet readiness, as if they are still looking, still processing, still expecting something to appear. This comes from a habit of constant input. Screens, conversations, environments. The eyes rarely get a true break, so they stay slightly engaged, even in darkness. But now there is nothing to see, nothing to track, nothing to anticipate. Let the muscles around the eyes soften without trying to control them. Let them sink deeper into stillness, as if the effort of looking has finally come to an end. And with that, something begins to shift. The mind slows, not because you forced it, but because one of its main channels of alertness has softened. Now the breath. This is where everything connects. Most people do not breathe in a way that supports rest. They breathe in a way that supports function. Short, controlled, efficient. Enough to keep going, but not enough to fully relax. And over time, this becomes the default. The body forgets that breath can be soft, that it can be slow without effort, that it can move naturally without being managed. So instead of trying to take a deep breath, simply notice the one that is already there. Notice where it stops. Notice how far it goes. Notice if there is a slight hesitation between inhale and exhale. Do not change it. Just watch it. Because when the breath is observed without interference, it begins to regulate itself. It lengthens slightly. It softens. It becomes less controlled. And as that happens, the nervous system starts to receive a different signal. There is no urgency. There is no threat. There is no need to stay alert. The jaw softens a little more. The eyes settle a little deeper. The breath becomes quieter. And all of this happens without force. This is the difference most people miss. They try to relax by doing more, by controlling more, by forcing the body into a state it is not ready for. But true release does not come from effort. It comes from removing the need for effort. The Stoics understood that resistance creates tension, that the more you try to control what is already happening, the more the system tightens. And that calm is not something you achieve by pushing, but something that appears when you stop pushing altogether. So tonight, you are not trying to relax, you are allowing relaxation to happen. Through awareness, through permission, through the quiet understanding that the body knows how to let go when it feels safe enough. And as this continues, even gently, something deeper begins to unfold. The tension that once felt permanent starts to feel optional. The tightness that once felt necessary begins to fade. Not all at once. Not completely, but enough for the body to remember something it has not felt in a while. Ease. A natural, unforced state where nothing is being held unnecessarily. And in that space, the nervous system begins to reset in a way that cannot be rushed. Because for the first time, it is not being pushed, it is being allowed. And that is where real release begins. And as the body begins to soften without being forced, the mind enters a quieter space. Not completely silent, but less crowded, less reactive. And in that space, something subtle becomes very powerful. Because what remains in the final moments before sleep is not just passing through. It is being absorbed. There is a small window at the edge of sleep where the mind becomes open in a different way, less guarded, less analytical, more receptive. And whatever fills that space tends to stay longer than expected. Most people do not notice this moment. They drift into it while still carrying noise. A replay of the day, a worry about tomorrow, a random thought that never needed attention. And because the mind is no longer filtering as strongly, those thoughts slip deeper, settling into the background of the nervous system. Not as conscious thoughts, but as quiet impressions. And these impressions shape more than people realize. They influence how the body feels in the morning. They affect the tone of the next day. They create a subtle direction for the mind before it even wakes up. This is why some mornings feel heavy before anything has even happened, and why others feel lighter without a clear reason. The last thought has weight, not because it is dramatic, but because it is the final message the mind receives before it lets go. This is what makes this moment important. Not something to control, but something to become aware of. Because if the mind is left unattended here, it will default to what it knows best. Repetition, habit, the same patterns it has been following all day, and those patterns will quietly carry into the deeper layers of rest. But if the mind is gently guided, even slightly, something begins to change. The Stoics believed that the mind becomes what it repeatedly focuses on, not through force, but through familiarity. And the final moments before sleep are one of the rare times where that focus can be shifted without resistance, not by trying to create perfect thoughts, but by choosing something simple, something steady, something that does not create tension. It could be a quiet sense of acceptance, a reminder that the day is done, a feeling of enoughness without needing to prove it. Not words you repeat aggressively, but a direction you allow the mind to settle into. Because the subconscious does not respond to pressure, it responds to tone. If the last tone is urgency, it carries that into rest. If the last tone is calm, it follows that instead. So as you approach this edge of sleep, notice what is trying to take that final space. A thought about something unfinished, a concern that feels important, a habit of revisiting what has already passed. And instead of following it, gently step back, not by pushing it away, but by not feeding it. Let it pass without adding anything to it, and then allow something softer to take its place. Not a forced positive thought, not something artificial, but something real and simple. The understanding that for this moment, nothing needs to be done. The quiet acknowledgement that you have done enough for today. The subtle feeling of letting everything rest where it is. This is not about programming the mind in a mechanical way. It is about guiding it into a state that supports rest. Because whatever you fall asleep holding, the body continues to carry. And whatever you release, the body begins to let go of as well. There is no need to create a perfect final thought. There is only a need to avoid ending the day in tension, and that is enough. As the mind settles into this softer space, something begins to shift beneath awareness. The nervous system follows the tone that has been set. The breath aligns with it. The body continues the process of release. And sleep becomes deeper, not because it was forced, but because the mind was not left in conflict. This is the quiet power of the last thought. It does not need to be strong. It does not need to be complex. It only needs to be aligned with rest. And as this becomes a habit, something begins to change over time. Mornings feel less heavy. The mind wakes up with less resistance. The body carries less of what was never meant to be held overnight. Not because everything has been solved, but because the cycle has been interrupted. The mind is no longer ending the day in tension. It is learning how to end in stillness, and that stillness becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Because the final moment before sleep is not just an ending, it is a quiet beginning. One that shapes what comes next, without needing to be forced. And tonight, that beginning is calm. And as the final thought begins to soften, something even deeper asks to be completed. Not another idea, not another reflection, but an ending. Because without an ending, the mind keeps a door slightly open, as if the day is still unfinished. There is a quiet resistance most people carry into the night, a sense that something is still pending, something still unresolved, something that should have been done better, said differently, handled more carefully. And because of this, the day never truly ends. It lingers, like a conversation that was never closed. But the mind was never meant to stay open like that. It was meant to close the day, fully. There is a difference between going to sleep and ending the day. Most people fall asleep while still holding on to it, the roles, the thoughts, the small emotional traces that were never released. And even in rest, the system keeps processing, as if it has not been given permission to stop. This is why sleep can feel incomplete, because the day was never allowed to finish. The Stoics practiced something simple but powerful. At the end of each day, they would step back and review it, not to judge themselves, not to criticize, but to acknowledge what happened, and then let it go completely. Not carry it, not fix it, not relive it. Just see it and release it. This is what creates psychological closure. It is not about having a perfect day. It is about having a complete one. As you lie here now, there is no need to go through every detail, no need to analyze every moment. But there is value in recognizing that today has already happened. Nothing from it is still unfolding. Nothing from it is still in motion. It exists only as memory, and memory does not need to be carried into rest. So instead of revisiting the day, take a step back from it entirely, as if you are looking at it from a distance, not inside it, not reacting to it, just aware that it has passed. The moments you handled well, they are done. The moments you wish were different, they are also done. There is nothing left to change. And this is where the release begins. Because holding on to the day often comes from the illusion that something can still be adjusted. That if you think about it long enough, something will resolve. But the truth is, thinking about it now does not change what has already happened. It only keeps it alive. And tonight, it does not need to stay alive. Let the day end fully, not by force, but by acceptance. The Stoics believed that peace comes from aligning with reality as it is, not as you wish it had been. And right now, the reality is simple. Today is over. Nothing from it needs your attention anymore. And when the mind accepts this, something begins to loosen. The need to replay fades. The need to analyze softens. The need to hold on begins to disappear. Not all at once, but enough for the system to recognize that it can finally stop. You can even allow a quiet sense of closure to form, not as words, but as a feeling, a subtle understanding that everything from today has reached its end point, that nothing is being carried forward, that nothing is being left open. The day has lived, and now it is allowed to rest, just like you. And as this settles in, there is a gentle shift in the body. The shoulders drop slightly. The breath becomes more natural. The background tension reduces without effort, because the nervous system no longer feels like something is incomplete. This is what it has been waiting for. Not perfection, not control, but closure. A clear signal that it can stop processing, that it can stop preparing, that it can stop holding on to what no longer exists. And from this place, sleep becomes different, deeper, cleaner, more complete, because it is not built on top of unfinished weight. It is built on release. This is not about forgetting your day. It is about finishing it, allowing it to exist in the past where it belongs, without dragging it into the present moment. And as you practice this night after night, something begins to change over time. The mind learns that it does not need to hold on to everything. The body learns that it can let go without being forced. The nervous system learns that rest is not something to earn, but something that follows naturally when there is nothing left to carry. So tonight, let the day close, gently, completely, without resistance, without return. It has already lived its full life, and now it is allowed to end, just as you are allowed to rest. And as the day finally comes to an end, something unexpected begins to take its place. Not emptiness, but space, a kind of quiet that was not there before. And within that space, there is a possibility most people never explore. The possibility of living without being constantly pulled by stress, even when life continues around you. Because stress is not only something that happens during the day, it is something that stays active inside long after the moment has passed. There is a pattern the mind follows without permission. A message arrives and the body tightens. A problem appears and the thoughts accelerate. A small inconvenience happens and suddenly the system reacts as if something serious is at stake. This response becomes so automatic that it feels unavoidable. But it is not. There is a difference between experiencing something and becoming entangled in it. Most people do not notice when they cross that line. They believe that every situation requires a full internal reaction, that every challenge deserves tension, that every uncomfortable moment must be carried inside as stress. And over time, this becomes a habit the nervous system repeats without question. But the Stoics saw this differently. They understood that events themselves are neutral, that what disturbs us is not what happens, but how deeply we allow it to enter us. And more importantly, they practiced something most people overlook. They remained available to life, but unreachable to unnecessary disturbance. This is not about ignoring problems. It is about choosing not to absorb them. There is a quiet strength in being able to witness something without letting it settle inside your body, to respond without reacting, to stay aware without becoming overwhelmed. And this begins with a simple shift. Not every thought needs to be believed. Not every situation needs to be carried. Not every feeling needs to be held onto. As you rest here, notice how stress often begins. It rarely arrives as something loud. It starts small. A thought that feels slightly urgent. A sensation that feels slightly uncomfortable. A moment that feels slightly off. And before you realize it, the mind has attached to it. The body has followed. And the system is now engaged in something that did not need that level of response. This is where awareness changes everything, because the moment you notice that attachment forming, you have a choice. Not to stop the thought, not to eliminate the situation, but to not step into it fully. Let it remain outside, like something passing by, instead of something entering you. This is what it means to become internally unreachable. Life continues. Situations happen. People speak. Plans change. But inside, there is a space that does not react automatically. A space that observes before engaging. A space that remains steady even when things are not. This does not happen through force. It happens through separation. The understanding that there is a difference between what is happening and what you choose to carry. The Stoics practice this by constantly reminding themselves of what is within their control and what is not. Not as an intellectual idea, but as a lived experience. When something fell outside their control, they did not let it settle inside their system. They acknowledged it and left it where it belonged, outside. And when something was within their control, they acted on it without adding unnecessary emotional weight. This created a kind of internal boundary, not visible, but deeply felt. A boundary where stress could approach, but not enter. You can begin to feel this now, not by trying to block anything, but by allowing things to exist without pulling them closer. If a thought arises, let it stay at a distance. If a sensation appears, let it move without following it. If something feels unresolved, let it remain that way for now. There is no need to bring everything inside. This is where the nervous system begins to calm in a new way, not because nothing is happening, but because less is being absorbed. The body no longer reacts to every signal. The mind no longer follows every thread. The system becomes quieter, not by removing life, but by reducing internal engagement with it. And over time, this changes how stress is experienced. It no longer feels overwhelming. It no longer lingers as long. It no longer defines the state of your body, because it is no longer being carried the same way. You remain present. You remain aware. But you are not pulled into every current that passes by. This is the art, not control, not suppression, but quiet distance. A kind of internal stillness that remains even when the outside world moves. And as this becomes more familiar, something begins to settle deeper within you. A sense that you do not have to react to everything. A sense that you can choose what enters your system. A sense that calm is not something you wait for, but something you maintain, even while awake. And from this place, the nervous system begins to trust. Not that life will be easy, but that it does not have to carry everything that happens. And that trust is what allows true rest to deepen. And as you begin to create that quiet distance between yourself and what tries to pull you in, something else slowly comes into focus. Not the noise this time, but the silence that follows it. Because for many people, silence does not feel peaceful at first. It feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. There is a reason for that. The nervous system learns from repetition. If it has spent years surrounded by stimulation, pressure, constant thinking, constant reacting, then silence can feel like something is missing, like something should be happening but isn't. And in that gap, the body can misread stillness as danger. Not because silence is unsafe, but because it is unfamiliar. When there is no distraction, no noise, no input, the mind has nothing to hold on to, and instead of relaxing, it sometimes starts searching, looking for something to engage with, something to process, something to prepare for, as if silence is only the calm before something goes wrong. This is why many people struggle when things finally become quiet. They turn on something in the background. They reach for their phone. They fill the space without realizing it, because the system has not yet learned that silence is safe, but it can learn. Just like the body learned to stay alert, it can also learn to soften. Not all at once, not by force, but gradually, through exposure, through experience, through gentle repetition. The Stoics often sought moments of stillness, not to escape life, but to understand it without interference. They knew that clarity does not appear in noise, it appears in quiet, and that the mind, when given enough stillness, begins to settle on its own. But that settling requires trust, and trust is built slowly. As you lie here, notice how silence feels in your body, not the external silence, but the internal one. The space between thoughts, the pause between breaths, the moments where nothing is happening. At first, there may be a subtle urge to fill it, to think something, to do something, to move away from it. This is normal. It is simply the system trying to return to what it knows. But instead of following that urge, stay here, not rigidly, not forcefully, just gently. Let the silence be there, without needing to change it, without needing to escape it. And as you remain with it, something begins to shift. The unfamiliar starts to feel less threatening. The space begins to feel less empty. The body starts to recognize that nothing is wrong, that nothing needs to be done, that this quiet moment is not a problem to solve, but a place to rest. The breath becomes softer within it. The muscles release slightly more. The mind stops searching as much, because the system is learning something new. It is learning that silence is not the absence of safety, it is the presence of it. This is how the nervous system rewires, not through effort, but through repeated experiences of calm without consequence. Every time you remain in silence without something negative happening, the body updates its understanding. It begins to realize that it does not need to stay alert in these moments, that it can lower its guard without risk. And over time, this becomes natural. Silence no longer feels like a gap. It feels like relief. A place where nothing is required. A place where the system can recover. You may begin to notice that the need for constant input fades, that the urge to fill every moment weakens, that being still no longer feels uncomfortable, because the body has learned that it is safe to be here. The Stoics spoke of this kind of inner quiet as a form of strength, not loud, not visible, but deeply stable. A mind that does not depend on constant activity to feel okay, a presence that remains steady even when there is nothing happening. This is what you are building, not by forcing silence, but by allowing it, not by eliminating thoughts completely, but by not reacting to their absence. Let the quiet deepen. Let the spaces between thoughts widen. Let the stillness settle into the body without needing to be filled. And if something arises within that silence, let it pass through just as gently. Because silence is not fragile. It does not break when something appears. It remains steady, unbothered, available. And as you continue to stay with it, even in small moments, the nervous system begins to shift into a different state. A state where calm is not something you wait for, but something that exists when nothing is disturbing it. A state where silence is no longer something to escape, but something to return to, again and again, until it becomes familiar, until it becomes safe, until it becomes home. And as silence begins to feel less threatening, something else quietly reveals itself. Not the absence of noise, but the craving for it. Because even when the body is tired, even when the mind wants to rest, there is often a pull towards something stimulating, something that keeps the system engaged just a little longer. There is a habit most people carry without realizing it. A need to feel something before sleep. Not always intense, sometimes just a small emotional spark, scrolling through messages, revisiting conversations, watching something that stirs a reaction, thinking about tomorrow, replaying the past. It feels harmless. It even feels normal. But underneath it, there is a pattern. The nervous system becomes used to constant emotional input, not because it needs it, but because it has learned to expect it. And over time, stillness begins to feel like a lack instead of a relief. This is where the subtle addiction forms, not to the content itself, but to the feeling it creates. A slight rush of attention, a small wave of reaction, a sense of being mentally active. Even if that activity is draining, the mind convinces itself that this is relaxation, but the body knows the difference. True rest feels quiet. This feels stimulating, and the more this pattern repeats, the harder it becomes to let go of it, because the system starts to rely on that stimulation to feel occupied, to avoid the silence, to avoid what might surface when nothing is being fed into the mind. This is why, even when you decide to rest, there is a pull to reach for something. Not because you need it, but because your system is used to it. The Stoics spoke about this in a different way. They warned against becoming dependent on external inputs for internal stability. They understood that when the mind relies on constant stimulation, it loses its ability to be at peace on its own. And that is where disturbance begins, because anything that needs constant input cannot truly rest. Breaking this pattern does not require discipline in the way most people think. It does not require forcing yourself into silence or cutting everything off abruptly. That often creates resistance. It begins with awareness, noticing the moment when the urge appears. That small impulse to check something, to think about something, to engage with something. And instead of immediately following it, pause. Just for a moment. Not to deny it, but to see it clearly. Notice how it feels in the body. A slight restlessness, a small tension, a sense that something needs to be done, and then stay with that feeling without acting on it. This is where the shift begins, because the urge itself is not the problem. The automatic response to it is. When you do not immediately feed it, the nervous system starts to learn something new, that the urge can exist without being satisfied, that the discomfort is temporary, that nothing bad happens when you do not follow it. And slowly, the intensity of that urge begins to fade, not because you forced it away, but because it was not reinforced. As this continues, something changes in how you experience rest. The need for stimulation weakens. The pull toward emotional input softens. The mind becomes less dependent on external engagement to feel settled, and silence begins to feel more natural, not empty, not boring, but sufficient. There is also something important to understand here. Emotional stimulation is not always obvious. It is not just what you watch or what you scroll. It is also the thoughts you choose to follow, the habit of creating scenarios, the tendency to revisit conversations, the quiet need to feel something instead of feeling nothing. These are all forms of stimulation, and they all keep the system active. So as you lie here, begin to notice not just what you do, but what you think. If the mind tries to create something to engage with, recognize it, and gently step back. You do not need to entertain every thought. You do not need to follow every storyline. You can let them pass without becoming involved. And as this happens, something deeper begins to settle. The mind becomes less crowded. The body becomes less activated. The nervous system starts to move toward a state it has not fully experienced in a while. A state without constant input. A state without constant reaction. A state where nothing is being added. And in that space, rest becomes more accessible. Not because you forced it, but because you removed what was blocking it. This is how the pattern begins to break. Not overnight, not perfectly. But gradually, each moment you choose not to feed the urge, the system rewires a little more. Each time you allow stillness instead of stimulation, the body learns that it is safe. And over time, the need for constant emotional input loses its grip. Because the mind remembers something it had forgotten, that it does not need to be entertained to be at peace, that it does not need to feel something all the time, that it can simply be still without losing anything. And in that stillness, a different kind of calm begins to appear, not exciting, not dramatic, but steady, quiet, and deeply restorative. The kind of calm that does not depend on anything outside of you, the kind that allows the nervous system to finally rest without being pulled back into motion. And as the pull toward constant stimulation begins to fade, something else becomes more visible, not the noise, but the habit behind it, the quiet tendency of the mind to keep going, even when there is nothing left to solve. Because when stimulation is removed, overthinking often steps in to fill the space. It does not arrive loudly. It feels useful at first, like you are figuring something out, like you are preparing, like you are making sense of things. But after a while, it becomes clear that nothing is actually being resolved. The same thoughts repeat. The same scenarios circle back. The same questions remain unanswered. And yet, the mind continues. Not because it is effective, but because it has learned to stay active. Overthinking is not intelligence. It is momentum, a pattern that keeps moving because it has not been interrupted. And the more you try to stop it by force, the more it pushes back, because resistance gives it more attention, more energy, more reason to continue. This is why most people feel stuck in it. They try to fight the thoughts, they try to silence them, they try to control them. And in doing so, they become even more involved. But there is another way, a quieter way, one that doesn't require stopping the thoughts, but changing your relationship to them. The Stoics practiced this without calling it by name. They learned to step back from their own thinking, to observe what was happening internally without becoming part of it. They understood that thoughts are not commands, they are not facts, they are simply movements of the mind, and movement does not need to be followed. This is where the shift begins, not in the thoughts themselves, but in where you stand in relation to them. As you lie here, notice the next thought that appears. Do not try to change it. Do not try to analyze it. Just notice it. See how it forms, how it holds your attention for a moment, and how, if left alone, it begins to fade. Then another one appears, and the same process repeats. This is the natural flow of the mind. Thoughts arise. They stay briefly. They pass. The problem begins when you step into them, when you follow them, when you build on them, when you treat them as something that must be solved. But what happens if you do not? What happens if you remain just outside of them, watching, not engaging, not resisting, just aware? This is the observer state, a place where thoughts can exist without pulling you in, a place where the mind is active, but you are not entangled in that activity. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. There may be a tendency to drift back into the thoughts, to follow them without noticing, and that is okay. Each time you become aware again, you are returning to the observer, not failing, returning. Over time, this becomes easier. The distance grows naturally. The thoughts lose some of their pull. The mind becomes less reactive, not because it has stopped thinking, but because you have stopped identifying with every thought that appears. This creates a kind of quiet separation, a space where thinking happens, but does not take over. And in that space, something begins to calm. The nervous system no longer responds to every thought as if it is important. The body no longer tightens with every mental movement. The breath becomes steadier, because the system is no longer caught in constant engagement. This is not about becoming empty. It is about becoming still within the activity. Let the thoughts come. Let them go, like something moving across the surface. You do not need to dive into each one. You do not need to follow where they lead. You can remain where you are, watching. This is where overthinking begins to lose its structure, because it relies on your participation. Without it, the loops cannot sustain themselves in the same way. They appear, they pass, and they are replaced by something quieter. Not silence, but less noise. Not emptiness, but less pressure. And in that lighter space, the mind begins to settle, not because it was forced, but because it was no longer being driven. The Stoics believed that clarity comes from seeing things as they are, not as the mind exaggerates them to be. And this kind of seeing requires distance, not avoidance, but perspective. The observer state gives you that. It allows thoughts to exist without becoming your reality. It allows the mind to move without pulling the body into tension. It allows you to rest, even while thinking continues. And as this deepens, something changes in how you experience your own mind. It feels less crowded, less urgent, less overwhelming, because you are no longer inside every thought. You are simply aware of them, and that awareness is enough. It does not need to do anything. It does not need to change anything. It only needs to remain steady, present, uninvolved. And in that place, the mind begins to quiet in a way that cannot be forced. Because for the first time, it is not being followed. It is being observed. And that changes everything. And as you begin to rest in that observer space, something else becomes easier to see. Not the thoughts themselves, but the feeling behind them. That quiet pressure that makes everything seem important. That subtle sense that something needs to be handled right now, even when there is nothing truly happening. There is a hidden signal the nervous system sends throughout the day. A signal that says, "This matters immediately." And over time, that signal becomes so constant that it starts to feel like reality. But it is not reality. It is conditioning. There is a difference between what is urgent and what feels urgent. Most of what the mind reacts to is not immediate danger. It is interpretation, a message that feels important, a situation that feels like it needs resolution, a thought that feels like it cannot wait. And the body responds as if something critical is unfolding. The heart tightens slightly, the breath becomes shorter, the muscles prepare. All for something that is often not happening in the present moment. This is the illusion. The nervous system has learned to treat many things as if they require immediate attention, not because they truly do, but because it has been trained to stay alert. When this pattern repeats long enough, everything begins to feel pressing. A small task feels heavy. A simple thought feels urgent. Even rest begins to feel like something that must be earned. But if you look closely, most of these signals do not come from the moment you are in. They come from anticipation, from memory, from habit. The Stoics understood this clearly. They believed that the mind creates unnecessary disturbance when it treats imagined problems as real ones, when it reacts to what might happen as if it is already happening. And in doing so, it keeps the body in a constant state of readiness. But what if, in this moment, nothing is actually urgent? As you lie here, notice what the mind tries to present as important. A thought about tomorrow, a reminder of something unfinished, a quiet sense that something needs to be handled, and instead of immediately engaging with it, pause. Look at it from a distance. Is it happening right now? Is there something you need to physically act on in this moment? Or is it simply a signal, a learned response, a habit of the system? This is where clarity begins. Because when you separate what is real from what is perceived, the pressure starts to loosen. The body begins to understand that it does not need to react, that it does not need to prepare, that it does not need to stay alert. And slowly, the urgency fades. Not because the thought disappears, but because its weight is no longer believed in the same way. There is nothing wrong with planning, nothing wrong with thinking ahead. But there is a difference between calm awareness and internal pressure. One allows the system to stay balanced, the other keeps it activated. The Stoics practiced stepping back from this illusion by reminding themselves of what is within their control in the present moment. Not tomorrow, not later, not imagined outcomes. Now, and most of the time, what was required in the present moment was very little. Just awareness, just presence, just stillness. You can feel this now. Right here, in this moment, there is nothing pressing, nothing chasing you, nothing demanding immediate action. The body is lying down, the breath is moving, the environment is still, and yet the mind may still try to create urgency. This is the pattern, but patterns can be seen, and once they are seen, they begin to lose their hold. Let the sense of urgency pass without following it. Let the thoughts that feel important remain where they are, without pulling them closer. You do not need to respond to everything immediately. You do not need to solve everything tonight. You do not need to prepare for every possible outcome. For now, there is only this moment, and this moment does not require urgency. As the body begins to recognize this, something shifts. The breath deepens slightly without effort. The muscles soften, the background tension decreases, because the system no longer feels like it is behind, or that something is about to happen. It begins to understand that it can slow down, that it can stop scanning, that it can rest without missing anything. This is where the illusion breaks, not through force, but through recognition. The understanding that urgency is often a signal that has outlived its usefulness, a habit that continues even when it is no longer needed. And as that understanding settles in, the nervous system begins to recalibrate. It no longer treats every thought as a demand. It no longer reacts to every signal as if it is critical. It begins to respond differently, more calmly, more slowly, more intentionally. And in that shift, something deeper becomes possible. A state where the mind is not constantly rushing ahead. A state where the body is not preparing for something that is not happening. A state where rest is not interrupted by unnecessary pressure. Because the system has learned something simple but powerful, that not everything that feels urgent truly is. And in that realization, the weight begins to lift, leaving behind a quieter, steadier space, where nothing needs to be rushed and nothing needs to be held too tightly. And as the illusion of urgency begins to fade, something softer becomes possible. Not a sudden silence, but a gradual release. Because once the mind stops believing that everything must be handled right now, it no longer needs to hold on to everything at once. There is a quiet mistake many people make when they try to find calm. They believe they must clear the entire mind, let go of everything, reach a state where nothing is moving, and when that does not happen, they feel like they are failing. But the mind was never meant to stop all at once. It was meant to settle slowly. There is a gentler way to release what you are holding, not all at once, but one piece at a time. This is micro-surrender, not dramatic, not forceful, just small moments of letting go. Because the weight you feel is not always from one large thing. It is often from many small things being held together. A thought about earlier, a quiet concern, a feeling that has not fully passed. None of them overwhelming on their own, but together they create pressure. And the instinct is to try to drop everything at once, but the body resists that, because it feels like losing control. So instead, you give it something it can accept, a small release. As you lie here, notice the next thought that appears. Do not analyze it, do not judge it, just recognize it, and then let it go, not by pushing it away, but by not continuing it. Let it end where it is. That is one surrender. Then another thought comes, maybe softer, maybe stronger. And again, you do the same. You see it, you allow it, and you let it pass without adding anything to it. Another surrender. This is not about stopping the flow. It is about not extending it, because most thoughts only stay as long as you feed them. When you stop feeding them, they begin to dissolve on their own. And with each small release, something shifts. The mind becomes lighter, the body becomes less engaged. The nervous system begins to recognize that it does not need to hold everything continuously. This is how real release happens, not in one moment, but in many small moments, each one barely noticeable. But together, they create a change. The Stoics practiced a form of this in their daily lives. They would not try to control every thought or emotion at once. Instead, they would meet each one as it appeared. They would acknowledge it, understand it, and then allow it to pass without attaching themselves to it. They trusted the process. They did not rush it. And over time their minds became quieter, not because they forced them to be, but because they stopped holding on to everything that passed through. You are doing the same now. Each thought you release is one less thing the body has to carry. Each moment you do not engage is one less layer of tension. And slowly, the system begins to feel different. Not empty, but less crowded. Not silent, but less noisy. There may still be thoughts, there may still be movement, but it no longer feels overwhelming, because you are not holding on to it all at once. You are letting it move, piece by piece. This is what makes micro-surrender powerful. It does not require strength. It requires permission. The permission to not hold on to everything. The permission to let thoughts pass without meaning. The permission to release control in small, manageable ways. And as you continue, something becomes easier. The gap between thoughts widens. The urge to follow them weakens. The sense of pressure reduces, because the system is learning that it does not need to stay engaged with everything that arises. It can let things come and go without resistance, without attachment, without effort. And in that process, something deeper begins to settle. The mind becomes more fluid. The body becomes more at ease. The nervous system begins to move toward a state of rest that is not forced, but natural. This is where calm starts to feel stable, not because everything has stopped, but because nothing is being held too tightly. Let another thought pass, then another, each one released without force, each one allowed to end. And as this continues, even gently, the mind begins to trust that it does not need to control everything, that it does not need to hold on to everything, that it can let go, one moment at a time. And that is enough, because calm is not built by stopping the mind completely. It is built by loosening your grip on it, until what remains is light, quiet, and finally at rest. And as the mind learns to release one thought at a time, something else becomes easier to notice. Not the thoughts anymore, but the body that has been quietly responding to them all along. Because even when the mind begins to soften, the body can still carry echoes of what it has been through. There is a habit most people develop without realizing it. When they feel tension, they immediately try to fix it, adjust it, stretch it, control it, as if the body is a problem that needs to be corrected. But the body is not asking to be fixed. It is asking to be heard. There is a difference between controlling the body and listening to it. Most of the time, the signals are subtle: a slight tightness in the shoulders, a heaviness in the chest, a small discomfort in the stomach. These sensations are easy to ignore during the day, covered by movement, by distraction, by constant activity. But when everything becomes quiet, they begin to surface, not as problems, but as messages. And the instinct is to react, to adjust position, to take a deeper breath, to try to make the feeling go away. But what happens when you do not react? What happens when you simply listen? This is where the body scan becomes different, not a technique to relax, but a way to understand. As you lie here, bring your attention gently to the body. Not all at once, just one area at a time. Start with wherever your awareness naturally lands. There is no need to choose perfectly. Maybe it is the shoulders, maybe the chest, maybe the legs. Wherever it is, stay there for a moment. And instead of trying to change anything, just notice. What does it feel like? Is there tightness? Is there warmth? Is there pressure? You do not need to describe it in detail. You only need to feel it, without interfering. This is where something subtle begins to shift. Because when the body is observed without being corrected, it starts to relax in its own way. Not because you forced it, but because it no longer feels misunderstood. The Stoics believed that resistance creates disturbance, and this applies to the body as well. The more you try to push against what you feel, the more the system tightens. But when you allow the sensation to exist without judgment, it begins to lose its intensity. Not immediately, but gradually. Stay with the sensation a little longer. Notice if it changes. Not because you are trying to change it, but because everything in the body is always moving, shifting, adjusting. There is nothing static about it, and when you observe without interference, you begin to see that. The tightness softens slightly, the pressure moves, the discomfort becomes less defined, all without effort. Then gently move your attention to another area. Again, no need to fix, no need to improve, just listen. The neck, the arms, the back. Each area has its own story, not in words, but in sensation. And as you move through the body like this, something becomes clear. The body has been communicating the entire time, but it was never given the space to be heard. Now it is. And that alone begins to change how it responds. The nervous system starts to recognize that it does not need to amplify its signals to get attention, that it does not need to hold tension as tightly, because it is finally being acknowledged. This creates a different kind of release, not one that comes from doing, but one that comes from understanding. There may still be areas that feel tight. That is okay. You are not here to eliminate every sensation. You are here to change your relationship with them, to move from control to awareness, to move from fixing to listening. And in that shift, the body begins to trust. It begins to soften in places that were holding for too long. It begins to settle in ways that cannot be forced, because it no longer feels like it needs to defend itself against constant correction. Let your attention move slowly. There is no rush, no destination, just a quiet exploration of what is already there. And as you continue, something deeper begins to unfold. The body and mind start to align. The tension that once felt separate from your awareness becomes part of it. Not something to fight, but something to observe. And in that observation, the intensity reduces. The system calms. The breath flows more naturally, because the body is no longer being managed. It is being allowed. This is the essence of the Stoic body scan. Not control, not correction, but presence. A quiet, steady attention that listens without trying to change. And through that listening, the body finds its own way back to ease. One area at a time, one sensation at a time, until what remains is not tension, but a sense of connection, a sense that the body is no longer something separate, but something you are finally in tune with. And in that connection, rest deepens, naturally. And as you begin to listen to the body instead of trying to fix it, something else slowly rises to the surface. Not in the muscles this time, but in the quiet space of the mind. Because when the body is finally heard, the mind often brings forward what it has been holding in the background. There is a pattern many people notice, but do not fully understand. The day ends, everything becomes still, and suddenly, old moments begin to replay. Conversations that already happened, situations that cannot be changed, words that linger longer than they should, not because you asked for them, but because something inside has not fully settled. It can feel frustrating, as if the mind is working against you, as if it refuses to let you rest. But the mind is not trying to disturb you, it is trying to complete something. Pain that was not fully processed during the day does not disappear. It waits. And when the noise fades, when distractions are gone, when there is finally space, it comes forward. Not to punish you, but to be acknowledged. This is why the replay happens, not because you are weak, not because something is wrong, but because something was never fully felt. During the day there is no time. You move from one thing to another. You respond, you adjust, you continue. There is no space to pause and feel everything completely, so the mind stores it, and at night it returns to it, not to trap you, but to finish what was started. The problem is not that the memory appears. The problem is how you respond to it. Most people resist it. They try to push it away. They distract themselves. They tell themselves to stop thinking. And in doing so, they create tension. Because resistance signals to the mind that the thought is important, that it needs attention, that it should stay, and so it does. This is where the cycle continues. The more you resist, the more it repeats. The more you try to stop it, the more it holds on. But there is another way, a quieter way, one that does not involve fighting the mind, but allowing it to move through what it needs to. The Stoics understood that pain is amplified by resistance, that what we avoid grows stronger, and that what we allow begins to lose its grip. So instead of pushing the memory away, let it appear, not fully stepping into it, not reliving it in detail, but allowing it to be there, without tension. Notice it. Acknowledge it, without judgment, without adding a story, without asking why it is there. Just see it for what it is. A thought, a memory, a movement in the mind. And then stay present. Stay with your breath. Stay with your body. Let the memory exist in the background, without becoming the center of your attention. This is the shift. You are no longer inside the replay. You are aware of it. And awareness does not feed it. It does not extend it. It allows it to pass naturally. At first it may feel like nothing is changing. The memory may return again. That is okay. Each time it appears, you meet it the same way, without resistance, without engagement, without trying to solve it. And slowly, something begins to change. The emotional charge weakens. The intensity fades. The replay becomes shorter, not because you forced it to stop, but because it was no longer being held in place. The nervous system begins to understand that this memory is not a current threat, that it does not need to stay active, that it can be released. And with that understanding, the body begins to soften again. The breath steadies, the tension reduces, because the system is no longer caught in a loop of resistance. This is how pain begins to quiet, not by removing it, but by changing how it is held. You do not need to revisit every detail. You do not need to find closure in this moment. You only need to stop fighting what is already here, and in that space something shifts. The memory loses its urgency. The mind stops returning to it as often, because it no longer feels like something unfinished. It feels like something that has been seen, and what is seen can finally settle. Let whatever comes, come. Let whatever passes, pass. Without holding, without pushing, without needing it to be different. Because the mind is not asking for perfection, it is asking for space. And when it receives that space, it begins to quiet on its own. Not completely, not instantly, but enough. Enough for the body to relax, enough for the breath to deepen, enough for rest to return. And in that gentle release, the cycle begins to break, not through effort, but through allowance. And that is where true calm begins to take root, quietly, naturally, without resistance. And as the mind begins to quiet without being forced, something deeper starts to unfold. Not another technique, not another step, but a different way of being. Because even after learning to release thoughts, to observe them, to stop resisting them, there is still one habit that remains. The habit of doing something internally. There is a constant movement most people never notice. Even when the body is still, even when the eyes are closed, something inside is always trying to act. to adjust, to think, to prepare, to improve the moment, as if rest is something that must be managed. But true rest does not come from doing less on the outside. It comes from doing nothing on the inside. And this is where it becomes difficult, because doing nothing internally feels unfamiliar. It can even feel uncomfortable. There is a subtle urge to return to activity, to check a thought, to guide the breath, to shift attention, to engage in some small way, not because it is necessary, but because stillness feels incomplete at first. This is the last layer, the place where the mind wants to stay in control, even in rest. But control is what keeps the system active. The Stoics understood that peace is not created through constant effort. It is revealed when effort stops, when the mind no longer tries to shape every moment, when it allows things to be as they are, without interference. This is not passivity. It is discipline. The discipline of not engaging. The discipline of not following. The discipline of not doing, even when the urge is there. As you lie here now, notice the smallest movements of the mind. A slight adjustment in attention. A subtle attempt to improve the breath. A quiet thought that tries to lead you somewhere. And instead of following it, pause. Let it be. Do not act on it. Do not correct it. Do not replace it. Just leave it where it is. This is what doing nothing internally looks like. Not empty, not forced, just still. There may still be thoughts. There may still be sensations. But you are not involved in them. You are not directing anything. You are not managing anything. You are simply allowing. This is where the nervous system begins to reach a deeper level of rest. Because as long as there is internal activity, even subtle, the system remains slightly engaged, slightly alert, slightly active. But when that activity fades, even for a moment, something shifts. The body drops into a different state. The breath becomes effortless. The mind becomes quieter. Not because it stopped, but because it is no longer being used. This is not something you achieve instantly. It is something you return to, again and again. Each time you notice yourself doing something internally, you step back, not with force, not with frustration, just with awareness. And over time, the gaps between doing become longer. The stillness becomes more familiar. The need to engage becomes weaker, because the system is learning that it does not need constant input to remain stable, that it can exist without activity. This is what most people never practice. They rest their bodies, but not their minds. They stop moving, but they continue doing. And because of that, the nervous system never fully resets. But now, something is different. You are not trying to control the moment. You are not trying to shape the experience. You are not trying to reach a certain state. You are allowing the absence of effort. And in that absence, something deeper begins to appear. A quiet form of rest. Not exciting, not dramatic, but stable, consistent, real. The Stoics believed that the highest form of calm comes from accepting what is, without trying to change it. And this applies here as well. The moment does not need to be improved. It does not need to be guided. It only needs to be left alone. Let everything be exactly as it is. The breath, as it is. The body, as it is. The mind, as it is. No adjustment, no correction, no movement, just stillness. And if something changes, let it change on its own. If something remains, let it remain. You do not need to interfere. This is the discipline. Not doing, not reacting, not engaging, even in the smallest ways. And as this deepens, the nervous system begins to reset at a level that effort cannot reach. Because it is no longer being stimulated from within. It is no longer being guided. It is no longer being held. It is simply resting, fully, naturally, without resistance, without control, without doing. And in that space, something rare begins to take hold. A sense of complete ease, not because everything has stopped, but because nothing is being done to it. And that is where true rest begins. Quiet, effortless, whole. And as the effort to do anything internally begins to fade, something else becomes easier to notice. Not the absence of thought, but the change in how it feels. Because the mind does not need to become silent for you to experience calm. It only needs to stop feeling loud. There is a difference between noise and disturbance. Most people believe that peace means having no thoughts at all, but the mind was never designed to be completely empty. It moves, it generates, it shifts. That is natural. The problem is not that thoughts exist. The problem is that they feel close, heavy, and demanding. They feel like they are happening to you. This is what creates emotional noise. A constant stream of thoughts that feel personal, urgent, and impossible to ignore. And because of that, the system reacts. The body tightens, the breath changes, the mind becomes even more involved. But what happens when that same noise is no longer in the foreground? What happens when it moves into the background, where it no longer pulls you in? This is where transformation begins, not by removing thoughts, but by changing their position. As you rest here, notice how thoughts still appear. They have not stopped. But something about them is different. They feel slightly further away, less demanding, less important. This is the shift from noise to background. You are no longer inside every thought. You are no longer reacting to each one. You are allowing them to exist, without bringing them forward, like distant sounds that do not require your attention. This is not something you force. It happens naturally when you stop engaging, because emotional noise depends on your involvement. It needs your attention to stay in the foreground. It needs your reaction to feel important. But when you do not give it that, it begins to fade into the background on its own. The Stoics understood that disturbance comes from attachment, not from the presence of thoughts, but from the belief that those thoughts need to be followed, solved, or acted upon. When that belief weakens, the mind begins to settle without effort. You can feel this now. Let the thoughts continue. Do not try to stop them. Do not try to replace them. Just let them move, while you remain where you are, present, uninvolved. And slowly, they begin to lose their weight, not disappearing, but softening, not silent, but quieter. This is what most people miss. Calm is not the absence of activity, it is the absence of involvement, the ability to let things happen without being pulled into them. And as this becomes more natural, something deeper begins to settle in the body. The nervous system no longer reacts to every mental movement. The breath remains steady, even when thoughts pass through. The muscles stay relaxed, even when the mind is active, because the system no longer treats every thought as something important. It begins to recognize that most of them are just background. This changes everything, because once thoughts lose their position in the foreground, they no longer control the state of your body. They no longer create tension. They no longer trigger reaction. They simply pass, like something that does not require attention. And in that space, rest becomes deeper, not because the mind has stopped, but because it is no longer loud. There may still be a quiet flow of thinking. That is okay. It does not need to be removed. It only needs to stay where it belongs, in the background, where it cannot disturb you. Let the mind move. Let the thoughts come and go. But do not bring them closer. Do not follow them. Do not give them weight. Stay where you are, aware, still, uninvolved. And as you do, the system continues to settle. The gap between thoughts widens. the intensity fades. The need to react disappears, because emotional noise is no longer being amplified, it is being allowed to exist without importance. And in that quiet shift, something becomes clear. You do not need to control your mind to find peace. You only need to stop placing everything in the center. Let it move to the edges. Let it soften into the background. And what remains is a different kind of silence. Not empty, not forced, but steady. A silence that exists, even when thoughts are still present. A silence that does not depend on what is happening in the mind. A silence that comes from where you stand, not from what is passing through. And in that silence, the nervous system finds a deeper level of rest. Because nothing is being held in the foreground anymore. Everything is allowed to fade into the background, where it no longer needs to be carried. And as the noise settles into the background, something even more subtle becomes clear. Not the thoughts themselves, but the quiet voice that follows them, the one that comments, explains, judges, adds meaning. Because even when thoughts are soft, the commentary can keep them alive. There is a second layer most people never notice. A thought appears, and then another thought responds to it. A memory comes, and then a reaction forms around it. A feeling rises, and the mind begins to explain it. This is where the disturbance continues. Not from the original thought, but from the commentary that follows. It is quiet, automatic, almost invisible, but it keeps the mind engaged, because every comment pulls you back in. It turns a simple thought into a story. It turns a passing feeling into something that needs attention. And before you realize it, you are no longer observing. You are involved again. This is why the mind feels busy even when you are trying to rest. Not because there are too many thoughts, but because each one is being followed by something else. An explanation, a judgment, a reaction. The Stoics understood this in a simple way. They believed that events are neutral, and that it is our interpretation that creates disturbance. But what they also practiced was something deeper. They learned to stop adding interpretation, to let things appear without immediately responding. This is internal non-reaction, not suppression, not avoidance, but the absence of commentary. As you rest here, notice the next thought that arises. It may be small, it may be random, it may not seem important. And right after it appears, notice what follows. Is there a reaction, a judgment, a subtle comment? Maybe something like, "This shouldn't be here," or "Why am I thinking this?" That is the second layer, and this is where the shift happens. Instead of stopping the thought, do not engage with the commentary. Let the first thought pass, and do not add anything after it. No explanation, no reaction, no continuation, just let it end. This may feel unusual at first, because the mind is used to completing every thought with another one. It feels like something is missing when that does not happen. But that space is exactly what creates calm, because without commentary, thoughts lose their structure. They do not build, they do not expand, they appear, and they dissolve. Try this again. A thought appears, you see it, and you let it pass, without adding anything. Another thought appears, and again, no commentary, no response, just awareness. And slowly, something begins to change. The chain of thinking breaks. The mind becomes less layered, less complex, because it is no longer building on itself. This creates a kind of lightness, a sense that thoughts are moving through without leaving anything behind. The nervous system begins to follow this shift. It no longer reacts to every thought, because there is nothing reinforcing it. No commentary means no escalation. No judgment means no tension. No reaction means no continuation. This is where stillness deepens, not because the mind is empty, but because it is not creating extra movement. The Stoics practice this in their own way by questioning their initial impressions. But beyond questioning, there is something even quieter. The ability to not respond at all, to let the impression exist, without turning it into something more. And that is what you are doing now. You are allowing thoughts to remain simple, unextended, uncomplicated, free to pass. Let the next thought come, and let it go, without a second voice following it. No agreement, no disagreement, no explanation, just silence after it. And in that silence, something becomes clear. The mind does not need to be controlled. It only needs to be left alone. Without commentary, thoughts cannot build momentum. Without reaction, they cannot hold your attention. Without judgment, they cannot create tension. They simply move, and you remain where you are, watching, still, uninvolved. And as this continues, the mind begins to quiet in a way that feels natural, not forced, not achieved, but revealed. Because what was creating the noise was not the thoughts themselves. It was everything added after them. Now, nothing is being added. And in that space, the nervous system begins to rest more deeply. The body softens further. The breath flows without interruption. Because there is no internal reaction keeping the system active, everything is allowed to pass without being held. And in that flow, something settles, a quiet, a steady calm, a space where nothing needs to be said. Nothing needs to be explained. Nothing needs to be followed, only noticed, and then released, without commentary, without resistance, without reaction. And as the commentary begins to fade, something even more subtle remains. Not the thoughts themselves, and not the reactions, but the quiet weight attached to them, the sense that some thoughts are good, others are bad, some are acceptable, others should not be there at all. This is where the mind creates pressure, because it is not just thinking, it is judging what it thinks. There is a silent habit that most people never question. Every thought is quickly labeled, approved or rejected, welcomed or pushed away. And these labels are not neutral. They carry weight. They turn simple mental activity into something personal. A random thought appears, and suddenly it feels like it says something about you. A memory comes up, and it feels like something is wrong. A feeling passes through, and it becomes something to fix. But the truth is much simpler. A thought is just a thought. It does not define you. It does not represent you. It does not need to be judged. The Stoics believed that disturbance begins when we assign meaning too quickly, when we turn impressions into conclusions, when we decide that what appears in the mind must say something about who we are. But it does not. The mind produces thoughts the same way the body produces sensations, naturally, continuously, without asking for permission. And just like a sensation in the body does not need to be judged, neither does a thought. This is where the no judgment zone begins, not as an idea, but as a practice. As you rest here, notice the next thought that appears, and then notice what follows. Is there a label? A quiet sense of this is good or this is not right? A subtle reaction that tries to accept or reject it? That is the weight. Not the thought itself, but the judgment placed on it. And this is what keeps the mind active, because judgment creates involvement. It pulls you into the thought. It gives it importance. It makes it feel personal. But what happens when there is no judgment? When a thought appears and nothing is added to it? No label, no approval, no rejection, just awareness. The thought becomes lighter. It loses its grip. It does not stay as long. because there is nothing holding it in place. This may feel unfamiliar at first, because the mind is used to organizing everything into categories, to deciding what is acceptable, to maintaining a sense of control through judgment. But that control comes with tension, because every judgment creates a reaction, and every reaction keeps the system active. So instead of judging the thought, leave it as it is. Let it appear without meaning. Let it exist without interpretation. Let it pass without conclusion. This does not mean you agree with it. It does not mean you identify with it. It only means you are not adding weight to it. And in that absence of judgment, something begins to shift. The mind becomes less heavy, less reactive, less involved, because it is no longer evaluating everything that appears. It is simply observing. This creates a different kind of space, a space where thoughts can move freely without creating disturbance, a space where the nervous system does not react to every mental event, because there is nothing signaling that something is wrong. The body follows this shift. The tension reduces. The breath becomes steadier, because judgment is no longer creating pressure. This is what makes the practice powerful, not because it removes thoughts, but because it removes the weight attached to them. And without that weight, the mind naturally settles. Let another thought come, and this time, do nothing with it. Do not label it. Do not analyze it. Do not question why it is there. Just let it be, exactly as it is, and then let it pass. You may notice that it feels lighter, less important, less connected to you, because it is no longer being turned into something more. The Stoics practiced this by stepping back from their initial impressions, by not immediately deciding what something meant, and in doing so, they created a space where the mind could remain calm, even when thoughts continued to appear. You are doing the same now. You are allowing thoughts to exist, without turning them into something they are not, without attaching identity, without attaching meaning, without attaching judgment. And in that space, something deeper becomes possible, a mind that is free from constant evaluation, a body that is free from unnecessary tension, a nervous system that is no longer reacting to every passing thought, because nothing is being treated as a problem. Everything is simply passing through. And as this continues, even gently, the system begins to trust that it does not need to judge everything, that it does not need to react to everything, that it can allow things to exist without being affected by them. And in that trust, calm becomes stable, not fragile, not temporary, but steady, because nothing is being weighed down by judgment anymore. Everything is light, everything is allowed, everything is free to pass, without meaning, without resistance, without weight. And as the weight of judgment begins to lift, something more honest starts to appear, not just thoughts, but feelings, the kind that were always there, but covered by reaction, by distraction, by the need to label and fix. Because when you stop judging the mind, you begin to feel the body more clearly. And sometimes what you feel is not immediately comfortable. There is a quiet instinct most people follow without thinking. The moment discomfort appears, they move away from it. They distract themselves. They think their way out of it. They reach for something that changes how they feel, not because they are weak, but because no one taught them how to stay. Discomfort has been treated like something to escape. But what if it is something to understand? There is a difference between pain that harms you and discomfort that is simply asking to be felt. The nervous system does not always distinguish between the two at first. It reacts the same way. It tightens. It looks for a way out. It searches for relief. And most of the time, the mind provides that escape. Through thinking, through distraction, through movement, anything that creates distance from the feeling. But the feeling does not disappear, it waits. And each time it is avoided, it becomes slightly more unfamiliar, slightly more intense when it returns. Not because it is growing, but because it has not been allowed to pass naturally. The Stoics practiced something different. They did not run from discomfort. They met it, not as something to fight, but as something to observe. They understood that emotions lose their intensity when they are fully experienced without resistance, that what is allowed moves, and what is avoided stays. This is where the shift begins, not in removing the discomfort, but in staying with it. As you lie here, notice if there is any sensation in the body that feels slightly heavy. It may not be obvious, it may be subtle. A tightness in the chest, a restlessness in the stomach, a quiet pressure somewhere you cannot fully explain. Do not try to change it. Do not try to understand it. Just notice it and then stay. Not moving away from it, not distracting yourself from it. Just present with it. At first, the mind may resist this. It may try to explain the feeling. It may try to reduce it. It may try to shift your attention somewhere else. That is the habit of escape. But you do not need to follow it. You can remain with the sensation exactly as it is. And as you stay, something begins to change. Not immediately, but gradually. The discomfort begins to feel less sharp, less threatening, because the nervous system starts to recognize that nothing is wrong, that the feeling can exist without needing to be removed, that it can move without being forced. This is how emotional discomfort begins to release, not through effort, but through presence. You may notice that the sensation changes slightly. It may soften, it may shift location, it may become less defined. This is the natural movement of emotion. It was never meant to stay still. It only stays when it is resisted. And as you continue to sit with it, without trying to escape, the body begins to trust. It learns that it does not need to create urgency around the feeling, that it does not need to push it away, that it can allow it and still remain safe. This is where something deeper settles, a sense of stability, not because discomfort is gone, but because it no longer controls your response. You are not reacting to it. You are not avoiding it. You are simply allowing it to pass through. And in that space, the intensity reduces. The grip loosens. The need to escape fades, because the system is no longer fighting itself. Let the sensation be there, without naming it, without explaining it, without needing it to change. And notice how it begins to move on its own, slowly, naturally, without effort. This is what most people never experience, because they never stay long enough. They leave too quickly, they distract too soon, and the cycle continues. But now something is different. You are staying. You are allowing. You are giving the body what it has been waiting for, space. And in that space, the discomfort begins to dissolve. Not because it was forced out, but because it was finally allowed to complete. The Stoics believed that strength is not in avoiding difficulty, but in meeting it without being shaken. And this is that practice. Not dramatic, not intense, just quiet presence with whatever arises until it passes. And as it does, something becomes clear. You do not need to escape what you feel. You only need to stop resisting it. And when that happens, even discomfort becomes something that moves, instead of something that stays, leaving behind a body that feels lighter, a mind that feels calmer, and a nervous system that is no longer trying to run from itself, but finally resting within it. And as you learn to stay with discomfort instead of escaping it, something else begins to change. Not the feeling itself, but the way it is understood. Because what once felt like something to fear starts to look different when you stop running from it. There is a feeling many people carry that seems overwhelming at times, a rush in the chest, a quickening of the breath, a sense that something is not right, even when nothing is happening. It is often called anxiety, and for most people it feels like a problem, something to get rid of, something to calm down, something to control. But what if it is not what it seems? There is a deeper layer beneath anxiety that is often missed. The body is not trying to harm you. It is trying to prepare you. It is creating energy, activation, readiness. The same response that appears when something matters, when attention is needed, when movement is required. The sensation itself is not the issue, it is the interpretation of it. The moment the mind labels that energy as danger, the system reacts differently, the body tightens more, the thoughts accelerate, the feeling becomes something to escape, and in that reaction, the intensity grows. Not because the energy increased, but because it was misunderstood. The Stoics saw this clearly. They believed that it is not the sensation that disturbs us, but the judgment we place on it, that the body can feel strong sensations without them becoming suffering, as long as they are not labeled as something threatening. This is where the shift begins, not in removing the feeling, but in seeing it differently. As you lie here, notice if there is any energy in the body. Not discomfort this time, but movement, a slight buzz, a sense of activation. It may feel like restlessness. It may feel like tension. It may feel like something that wants to move. Instead of calling it anxiety, just notice it as energy. Neutral, present, not good, not bad, just there, and stay with it. Without trying to slow it down, without trying to remove it, just observe how it feels in the body, where it sits, how it moves. This is where the nervous system begins to change its response. Because when the mind does not label the sensation as danger, the body does not escalate it. It does not add more tension. It does not increase the urgency. It simply allows the energy to exist and then to move. You may notice that the feeling shifts slightly. It may spread. It may soften. It may rise and fall. This is natural. Energy in the body is not meant to stay still. It is meant to move through, but when it is resisted, it becomes stuck. When it is labeled as something negative, it becomes amplified. And when it is feared, it becomes overwhelming. But when it is allowed, it changes. The Stoics would often remind themselves that sensations are temporary, that no feeling, no matter how intense, remains forever, and that the mind has the power to either amplify it or let it pass. You are practicing that now. You are allowing the sensation to be there without turning it into something more, without building a story around it, without trying to escape it. And in doing so, something subtle begins to happen. The energy loses its edge. It feels less sharp, less threatening, more like movement than something to fear. This is the reframe. Not a forced belief, but a direct experience. The understanding that what felt like anxiety was simply energy waiting to move. And when it is not blocked, it moves, slowly, naturally, without effort. You may begin to feel that the body does not need to fight it, that the breath does not need to change, that nothing needs to be done, because the sensation is already changing on its own. This is where trust begins, not in the absence of feeling, but in the ability to remain steady while feeling it. The nervous system learns that activation does not mean danger, that energy does not need to be controlled, that it can rise and fall without creating disturbance. And over time, This changes how anxiety is experienced. It becomes less overwhelming, less urgent, less personal, because it is no longer seen as something wrong. It is seen as something passing. Let the energy be there, without naming it, without reacting to it, without needing it to leave. And notice how it begins to shift. Not because you made it happen, but because you stopped interfering with it. This is where calm deepens, not by removing sensation, but by changing your relationship to it, until what once felt like something to escape becomes something that moves through you without resistance. And in that movement, the body finds its way back to balance, quietly, naturally, without force. And as the energy in the body begins to move without being feared, something deeper begins to settle beneath it. Not the sensation itself, but the story behind it. Because many of the feelings that rise at night are not just from the present moment. They are tied to things that have already happened. And yet, the mind continues to treat them as if they are still unfolding. There is a quiet resistance most people carry without noticing. Not to what is happening now, but to what has already happened. A memory, a mistake, a moment that did not go as expected. Something said, something left unsaid. And even though it is over, the mind holds on to it as if it can still be changed. This is where the tension remains, not in the event itself, but in the refusal to let it be final. The nervous system responds to this resistance as if something is still unresolved. It stays slightly active, slightly alert, as if it is waiting for a different outcome. And because of that, the body never fully relaxes. But there is a point where the past no longer needs to be processed. It needs to be accepted, not approved, not justified, but accepted as something that has already happened. The Stoics practiced this with a kind of clarity that most people avoid. They understood that reality does not change based on how we feel about it, that holding on to what should have been different only creates internal conflict. And that peace begins the moment we stop arguing with what is already done. This is radical acceptance, not passive, not indifferent, but clear. As you lie here, notice if there is anything from the past that still feels slightly unfinished. It may not be obvious. It may be a small thought, a quiet feeling, something that lingers without fully forming. Do not analyze it. Do not try to fix it. Just recognize that it has already happened, that it exists in memory, not in reality, and then allow a simple shift. Instead of asking why it happened or how it could have been different, let the question end. Let the need for explanation fade. And replace it with something quieter. It has already happened. Not as words you repeat, but as something you understand deeply, without resistance. This is where the nervous system begins to change, because when the mind stops resisting the past, the body no longer needs to stay activated around it. The tension that was tied to that memory begins to loosen. The breath becomes steadier, the muscles soften, because there is nothing left to prepare for, nothing left to resolve, nothing left to change. This does not mean the memory disappears. It may still be there, but it feels different, lighter, less charged, less demanding, because it is no longer being held against reality. It is simply part of what has been. The Stoics believed that suffering comes from wanting things to be other than they are, and when that wanting fades, something else appears. Relief. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing is being resisted anymore. Let whatever has happened be complete, not revisited, not corrected, not held, just allowed, as something that belongs to the past. And as this settles in, you may notice a quiet shift in the body, a sense of release that does not come from doing anything, but from stopping something, stopping the internal argument, stopping the need to change what cannot be changed, stopping the resistance. This is where the reset begins, not through effort, but through acceptance. Because the nervous system does not need perfect outcomes, it needs closure. It needs a clear signal that what has happened is over. And when it receives that signal, it begins to relax, deeply, naturally, without being forced. Let the past remain where it is, without pulling it forward, without holding on to it, without needing it to be different, and notice how the body responds, how the tension reduces, how the breath softens, how the mind becomes quieter, because there is nothing left to resist. Everything that has happened has already happened, and that is enough. Enough for the system to stop, enough for the body to rest, enough for the mind to let go. And in that letting go, something opens, a space where nothing from the past is being carried, a space where the nervous system is no longer tied to what is already done, a space where calm can finally deepen without interruption, because nothing is being held against reality anymore. Everything is allowed, everything is complete, and in that completeness, the reset begins. And as the past is finally allowed to rest where it belongs, something else begins to surface. Not from memory this time, but from habit. The quiet habit of looking outside for a sense of safety. Because even when nothing is happening, the body can still wait for something. Approval, reassurance, confirmation that everything is okay. There is a subtle dependence most people carry without realizing it. A need to feel settled only when something external confirms it. When someone responds. When a situation is clear. When everything looks stable from the outside. And when that confirmation is not there, the nervous system remains slightly tense, as if something is missing. But safety was never meant to come from outside, because the outside is always changing. People shift, situations change, responses vary. And if your sense of calm depends on those things, it will always feel uncertain. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that anything outside of your control cannot provide lasting stability, that relying on it creates a fragile kind of peace, one that disappears the moment circumstances change. So they practiced something different. They learned to generate steadiness from within, not by controlling the outside, but by changing their relationship to it. As you lie here, notice if there is any subtle waiting in your body, a quiet expectation, a sense that something needs to happen before you can fully relax. It may not be obvious, but it can appear as a slight tension, a restlessness, a feeling that something is incomplete. This is the pattern. The system is waiting for confirmation. But what if nothing needs to confirm anything right now? What if safety is already available, without anything changing outside? This is where the shift begins, not by forcing yourself to feel safe, but by removing the condition that says you cannot feel safe until something else happens. Let the body rest without waiting. Let the breath move without checking. Let the moment be enough, without needing validation. This may feel unfamiliar at first, because the mind is used to looking outward. It searches for signs, for reassurance, for something that tells it everything is okay. But right now, nothing is happening that requires that. There is no immediate threat, no action needed, no response required. And the body can begin to recognize that. Not through words, but through experience. Stay here, without reaching outward, without checking for anything, just resting, and notice what begins to change. The tension that was tied to waiting starts to soften. The breath becomes more natural. The sense of restlessness fades slightly, because the system is no longer dependent on something external to settle. It is settling on its own. This is how internal safety is built, not through belief, but through repetition. Each time you allow yourself to rest without needing validation, the nervous system learns something new, that it does not need confirmation, that it does not need permission, that it can relax without conditions. And over time, this becomes stable. The need to check weakens. The need to seek reassurance reduces. The body begins to trust itself, not because everything is controlled, but because it no longer depends on control. The Stoics practiced this by focusing on what was within them, their thoughts, their responses, their presence. They did not wait for the world to become stable before they allowed themselves to be calm. They created that calm, regardless of what was happening outside. You are doing the same now. You are allowing the body to settle without needing anything else. No response, no confirmation, no change, just this moment, as it is. And in that, something deepens, a quiet sense of stability, not tied to anything external, not dependent on anyone else, just present, steady, available. Let that feeling grow, not by holding on to it, but by not interrupting it, by not looking outside for something more, because nothing more is needed. Everything required for this moment of safety is already here. And as the body begins to recognize that, the nervous system resets in a deeper way, not reacting, not waiting, not searching, just resting within itself, fully, naturally, without needing anything else to make it okay. And as the need for external reassurance begins to fade, something even lighter becomes possible. Not just safety, but freedom from carrying anything at all. Because even when the mind is calm, even when the body is soft, there can still be a subtle sense of holding. Holding roles, holding identity, holding expectations, holding the quiet pressure of being someone. And without realizing it, that weight follows you into the night. It is not always obvious. It does not always feel heavy. But it is there, a quiet tension in the background, as if something still needs to be maintained. This is what keeps the system from fully letting go, because true rest is not just the absence of stress, it is the absence of weight. There is a state the mind can enter where nothing is being carried, not the past, not the future, not even the idea of who you are supposed to be. A state where everything is set down, even for a moment. This is psychological weightlessness, not empty, not disconnected, but free. As you lie here, notice if there is anything you are still holding on to, not physically, but internally. A role you need to return to tomorrow, an expectation you feel responsible for, a quiet sense of identity that feels like it must be maintained. You do not need to analyze it, you only need to notice that it is there, and then gently set it down, not by force, not by rejection, but by allowing it to rest outside of this moment. You are not losing anything, you are only pausing it for now. There is no need to be anyone, no need to perform, no need to hold on to a version of yourself. All of that can return when the day begins again. But right now, it is not needed. Let that idea soften. Let the sense of "I need to be this" fade into the background, and notice what happens. Something begins to lift. A quiet lightness, a sense that nothing is pressing down from within, because the mind is no longer carrying an identity. It is simply present, without weight. This is not something you create. It is something that appears when nothing is being held. The Stoics understood that much of our burden comes not from life itself, but from what we attach to it, the roles we cling to, the expectations we carry, the image we maintain. And when those attachments loosen, something changes. The mind becomes lighter, The body follows. The nervous system begins to settle at a deeper level because it is no longer supporting the weight of constant identity. Stay here, in this lightness, without trying to hold on to it, because holding would add weight again. Just allow it. Let everything remain set down, even the smallest things, even the subtle ones. Nothing needs to be carried into sleep. Nothing needs to be maintained. Nothing needs to be prepared. Just this moment, without weight. You may notice the breath becomes softer, not deeper, just easier. The body feels less dense, less tight, as if it is no longer bracing against anything, because there is nothing left to brace against. The mind becomes quieter, not because thoughts are gone, but because nothing is being held onto. Everything is allowed to pass through without staying. This is where rest becomes different. Not just the absence of activity, but the absence of burden. And in that absence, something opens, a deeper kind of stillness. One that does not require effort. One that does not need to be maintained. One that simply exists when nothing is being carried. Let yourself remain here, without adding anything, without taking anything back, just resting in the space where nothing is yours to hold. And as this continues, the nervous system begins to reset in a way that is difficult to describe, but easy to feel. A sense of complete ease. A sense that everything has been set down. A sense that you are not responsible for anything in this moment. And in that space, something becomes clear. You were never meant to carry everything all the time. You were only meant to carry what is needed, when it is needed. And right now, nothing is needed. So everything can remain where it is, outside of you, leaving you light, still, and finally, at rest. And in that space where nothing is being carried, something quiet begins to rise again, not heavy like before, but familiar. A memory, a moment that once held weight, something that used to pull you back into yourself. Because even when the mind becomes light, there are still pieces of the past that try to return, not to stay, but because they have not yet changed form. Regret is one of those pieces. It does not always appear loudly. Sometimes it comes as a small thought, a subtle what if, a quiet replay of something that could have been different. And even if the feeling is not strong anymore, there is still a trace of charge behind it, not because the event is still happening, but because the mind has not fully released its meaning. There is a tendency to hold regret as something personal, something that defines you, something that needs to be corrected even when it cannot be changed. And because of that, the memory stays active, not in reality, but in feeling. But what if the memory could remain without the charge? What if it could exist like any other moment, without pulling you back into it? This is where the shift happens, not in removing the memory, but in changing its weight. The Stoics believed that the past is fixed, that no amount of thinking, wishing, or replaying can alter what has already happened. And once that is clearly understood, the energy tied to it begins to loosen. Not immediately, but gradually. As you rest here, notice if any memory from the past comes forward. It may be something small. It may be something that once felt significant. Do not push it away. Let it appear. But this time, do not step into it. Stay where you are. Observe it from a distance, without entering the story, without revisiting the emotion. Just see it as something that exists in the mind, nothing more. At first, the old feeling may try to follow it. That is the habit. The mind is used to pairing the memory with emotion. But you do not need to continue that pattern. You can allow the memory without adding the feeling, without recreating the experience, without making it personal again. This is where the charge begins to dissolve, because the energy of regret is not in the memory itself, it is in the emotional response attached to it. And when that response is no longer reinforced, the memory changes. It becomes lighter, more distant, less involved, not erased, but neutral, like something you can see, without being pulled into. This does not happen through force. You do not need to convince yourself. You do not need to replace the thought. You only need to stop feeding the emotion attached to it. Each time the memory appears, meet it the same way. See it, acknowledge it, and let it pass, without entering it. Over time, something begins to shift. The memory returns less often, and when it does, it feels different, less sharp, less personal, less connected to your identity, because it is no longer being carried as something that needs to be resolved. It is simply something that happened, and that is enough. The Stoics practiced this kind of detachment not as indifference, but as clarity. They understood that holding on to regret does not change the past. It only disturbs the present. And when that disturbance is removed, something deeper becomes possible. Peace with what has been, not because it was perfect, but because it is no longer being resisted. Let the memory rest where it is. Do not bring it closer. Do not push it away. Just allow it to exist, without weight. And notice how the body responds. The tension that once followed the memory begins to fade. The breath remains steady. The mind stays calm, because there is no longer a reaction attached to it. This is how regret transforms, not into something positive, not into something meaningful, but into something neutral, something that no longer holds you, something that no longer defines you, something that simply exists without charge. And in that neutrality, something opens. A space where the past is no longer active, a space where the mind is not pulled backward, a space where the nervous system is free from what has already ended, because nothing is being held onto, nothing is being replayed with emotion. Everything is allowed to remain exactly where it belongs, in the past, without weight, without meaning, without disturbance. And in that space, rest deepens again, quietly, naturally, without interruption, because nothing from before is being carried into now. Everything is simply at rest. And as the past begins to lose its weight, something else becomes easier to see. Not the memory this time, but the way the mind shapes what it is looking at. Because even in the present, even when nothing from before is being carried, the mind still has a habit. It makes things feel bigger than they are, not intentionally, not dramatically, but subtly. A small issue becomes something that fills the mind. A simple situation feels like it has layers. A thought stretches into something that feels difficult to hold. And before you notice it, the problem is no longer what it actually is. It is what the mind has turned it into. This is where tension begins again. Not from the problem itself, but from the size it takes inside you. There is a quiet expansion that happens in the mind. It adds meaning. It adds importance. It adds urgency. It creates a sense that something is larger, heavier, more complex than it truly is. And the body responds to that size. It tightens. It prepares. It holds, as if something significant is happening. But if you step back, something becomes clear. Most problems are small in reality and large in perception. The Stoics practiced seeing things as they are, not as the mind exaggerates them to be. They would strip situations down to their basic form, not adding anything, not taking anything away, just seeing the fact of it. And when that happens, the size changes. As you lie here, notice if there is anything in your mind that feels like a problem. It may be something from earlier, It may be something about tomorrow. It may be something that feels unresolved. Do not analyze it. Just notice how it feels. Does it feel large? Does it feel heavy? Does it feel like it is taking up space? Now, instead of stepping into it, step back. Look at it from a distance, not inside it, outside it, and gently ask, what is actually happening? Not what it means, not what it could become, not what might happen next, just what is real. Often the answer is simple: a task that needs to be done, a conversation that needs to happen, a situation that is already finished, nothing more. And as that clarity appears, something begins to shift. The layers start to fall away. The extra meaning disappears. The size reduces because what was added by the mind is no longer being held. This does not remove the problem. It changes its weight. It becomes something manageable, something contained, something that does not need to fill your entire system. This is where the body begins to respond differently. The tension reduces, the breath steadies, because the system is no longer reacting to something that feels overwhelming. It is responding to something that is simply there. The Stoics would remind themselves that it is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. And when that interpretation is simplified, the disturbance fades. You can feel this now. Let the problem remain, but do not add anything to it. Do not build it. Do not expand it. Just see it in its smallest form, without extra meaning, without extra weight, and notice how it feels different. Lighter, less demanding, less present, because it is no longer being amplified. This is the technique. Not solving everything, not removing everything, but reducing everything to what it actually is, and nothing more. As you continue to rest here, allow anything that feels large to gently shrink, not by force, but by clarity, by removing what was added, by letting it return to its true size, and in that process, something settles. The mind becomes less crowded, the body becomes less tense. The nervous system no longer feels like it is holding something overwhelming, because it is not. It was only holding something that appeared larger than it was. Now, it is seen clearly. And what is seen clearly no longer needs to be carried the same way. Let everything remain simple. Let everything stay small. Let everything exist without expansion. And notice how the system responds, how the weight reduces, how the pressure fades, how the mind becomes quieter, not because there is nothing there, but because nothing is being exaggerated. This is where calm deepens again, not through control, but through perspective. Because when things are seen as they are, they no longer disturb you the same way. They simply exist. And in that simplicity, the body finds rest, the mind finds space, and the nervous system begins to settle without effort, because nothing is bigger than it needs to be anymore. Everything is just what it is, and that is enough for peace to remain. And as everything begins to return to its true size, something else becomes clear. Not just the problems themselves, but the pressure behind them. The quiet belief that everything must be figured out, that every loose end needs to be tied, that before you can truly rest, something has to be solved. This is where the mind keeps itself awake. Not because there is danger, but because there is a sense of responsibility that never switches off. There is a habit of trying to solve life at the wrong time, at night. When the body is ready to rest, the mind begins to work. It replays decisions. It plans outcomes. It searches for answers, as if clarity must come now, as if rest can wait. But the truth is simple. The night was never meant for solving. It was meant for releasing. The Stoics understood that there is a time for action and a time for stillness. That wisdom is not just in knowing what to do, but in knowing when to stop doing. And when the day ends, the role of solving ends with it. Not because your life is complete, but because this moment does not require completion. As you lie here, notice if there is any part of your mind trying to figure something out. A situation, a decision, a future outcome, something that feels like it needs resolution. Do not follow it, just see it. Notice how it tries to pull you in, how it creates a sense that you should think about it now, and gently step back. Not because it does not matter, but because it does not belong here. There is nothing you can solve in this state that will not be clearer in the light of the day. At night, the mind does not think with clarity, it thinks with fatigue, with emotion, with limited perspective. And anything you try to solve from that place becomes heavier, not clearer. So instead of engaging, allow the problem to remain unresolved. Let it stay exactly where it is, without needing to reach a conclusion, without needing to understand it fully. This is where something shifts, because the need to solve is what creates the pressure, not the problem itself. When that need is removed, the system begins to relax. The mind no longer feels like it is behind. The body no longer feels like it must stay active, because there is no task to complete. There is only rest. The Stoics practiced letting go of what was not within the present moment. And right now, the only thing within this moment is stillness. Not answers, not solutions, not decisions. Just this. The breath moving, the body resting, the mind softening, and that is enough. You do not need to solve your life tonight. You do not need to figure everything out. You do not need to reach clarity on every situation. Those things will return tomorrow, when the mind is ready. But for now, they can wait. Let them wait, without holding on to them, without checking them again, without trying to make progress. Just leave them where they are, and notice how the body responds. The tension tied to responsibility begins to fade. The pressure reduces. The breath becomes more natural, because the system is no longer trying to work when it should be resting. This is where real recovery begins. Not when everything is solved, but when nothing is being worked on. Let the mind stop searching. Let the questions remain unanswered. Let the need for resolution dissolve, just for now. And as that happens, something deeper settles. A quiet sense of permission. Permission to not have everything figured out. Permission to not be in control of everything. Permission to rest, even with unfinished parts of life. Because rest is not something you earn by solving everything. It is something you allow by letting everything pause. The Stoics knew that life unfolds in time, that not everything needs to be resolved immediately, and that forcing answers only creates more disturbance. So tonight, there is nothing to solve, nothing to fix, nothing to complete. Only this moment, as it is. And in that acceptance, the mind begins to quiet in a different way, not because it has answers, but because it has stopped searching. And that is where calm becomes stable, because there is no movement pulling you forward, no pressure pushing you to act, only stillness, only rest, only the quiet understanding that everything can wait, and in that waiting, the nervous system finally lets go, fully, naturally, without resistance, because there is nothing left to do, and that is enough. And as the need to solve everything begins to fade, something even more relieving starts to take its place. Not a solution, but a realization, a quiet understanding that changes the way the mind holds this moment. There is a sentence the nervous system rarely hears. Nothing needs to be done now. It sounds simple, almost too simple. but for a mind that has been trained to stay active, to stay prepared, to stay ahead of everything. It feels unfamiliar because the system is used to scanning for the next step, the next task, the next thing that requires attention. Even in stillness, it searches. Even in rest, it prepares, as if stopping completely would cause something to be missed. But right now, there is nothing to miss. There is no action required, no response needed, no problem waiting to be handled in this exact moment. And yet, the mind may still try to create something. A thought about later, a reminder, a quiet pull toward doing. This is the habit, not necessity. The Stoics understood that peace comes when you align with what the present moment actually requires, not what the mind imagines it requires. And most of the time, especially at night, the present moment requires very little. Just awareness, just stillness, just being. As you lie here, feel into this moment as it is, not as it could be, not as it should be, but as it is. The body is lying down, the breath is moving, the environment is quiet. There is no immediate demand, nothing pressing, nothing urgent. And slowly, let that realization settle. Nothing needs to be done now, not as something you repeat, but as something you allow. Let the body absorb it. Let the mind soften around it, because this is not a thought. It is a state where action is not required, where preparation is not needed, where the system can stop reaching forward. This may feel unfamiliar at first. There may be a subtle discomfort, a sense that something should be happening, that something is missing, that you should be doing something. But that feeling is not coming from the moment. It is coming from habit, and habit can be seen. And when it is seen, it begins to lose its hold. Stay here, without reaching for anything, without moving toward anything, without trying to change anything, just resting in the understanding that this moment is complete, as it is. And notice what begins to change. The mind slows down, not because it was forced, but because it no longer has a direction to move toward. The body softens, not because it was adjusted, but because it no longer feels the need to prepare. The breath becomes quieter, because there is no urgency driving it. This is what happens when the system understands that nothing is required. It stops, naturally, without resistance, without effort. The Stoics practiced returning to the present moment not as a technique, but as a way of living. They did not allow the mind to constantly pull them into what was not happening. They stayed with what was real and allowed everything else to wait. You are doing the same now. You are not moving ahead. You are not reaching back. You are here. And here, nothing needs to be done. Let that settle deeper. Let it reach the parts of the body that are still holding. The shoulders, the chest, the breath. Allow them to release, not because you are telling them to, but because they no longer have a reason to hold. Because there is nothing to prepare for, nothing to respond to, nothing to carry forward. Only this. And in this, something opens. A space where the mind is not occupied, a space where the body is not engaged, a space where the nervous system is no longer in motion. This is not emptiness, it is completeness. A moment that does not need anything added to it. A moment that does not need anything removed. A moment that is already enough. Stay here, without changing it, without questioning it, without leaving it. And as you do, the system begins to reset in a deeper way, because it is no longer being pulled in different directions. It is no longer trying to keep up. It is simply resting, within a moment that asks nothing from you. And in that, something becomes clear. You do not need to earn rest. You do not need to complete everything before you allow it. You only need to recognize when nothing is required. And right now, nothing is. And that is enough for the body to release. Enough for the mind to quiet. Enough for the nervous system to settle completely. Without effort, without pressure, without doing anything at all. And as the mind settles into the understanding that nothing needs to be done right now, something else becomes easier to notice. Not what is happening in this moment, but how often the mind leaves it. There is a quiet habit that runs in the background of most lives. The mind moves backward into what has already happened, or forward into what has not happened yet. It rarely stays here for long. It drifts, it revisits, it anticipates. This movement feels natural, almost automatic, but it comes with a cost, because every time the mind leaves the present moment, the body follows. If it goes into the past, the body can feel what was already felt. If it moves into the future, the body can react to what has not even happened. And in both directions, the nervous system becomes active. Not because something is happening now, but because the mind is somewhere else. This is mental time travel. Not physical, but deeply felt. And most people do not notice how often it happens. A thought about something that went wrong earlier. A quiet replay of a conversation. A small jump into tomorrow. A question about what might happen. And just like that, the mind is gone. The body tightens slightly. The breath changes. The system reacts. All for something that is not here. The Stoics understood that the present moment is the only place where life is actually happening, that the past is already done, and the future is not yet real, and that disturbance comes from treating both as if they are happening now. As you lie here, notice where your mind goes. Does it return to something that has already passed? Does it move towards something that has not yet come? Just notice, without trying to stop it. Because the movement itself is not the problem. The automatic following of it is. This is where the shift begins, not by forcing the mind to stay, but by choosing not to follow where it goes. If the mind moves into the past, let it go there, but do not step into it. Stay where you are, aware that the thought is happening without becoming part of it. If the mind moves into the future, let it appear. But do not continue it, do not build on it, do not prepare for it. Just see it and remain here. This is how the habit begins to loosen. Not by stopping the mind from moving, but by stopping yourself from moving with it. Because the mind will continue to produce thoughts. But you do not have to travel with each one. You can remain in the present while thoughts pass through. And as you do this, something changes. The body begins to stay where it is. It no longer reacts to past or future. It responds only to what is actually happening, and what is happening right now is very simple. The body is resting. The breath is moving. The environment is still. Nothing more. This is where the nervous system begins to calm, because it is no longer being pulled in different directions. It is no longer reacting to imagined situations. It is no longer reliving what has already ended. It is here, fully, and in that, the tension reduces. The breath becomes more steady. The mind feels less scattered, because it is no longer stretched across time. It is gathered into this moment. The Stoics practiced returning to the present not as a concept, but as a discipline. Each time the mind drifted, they would bring it back, not by force, but by recognition. You are doing the same now. Each time you notice the mind leaving, you return, gently, without frustration, without judgment, just back to what is real. And over time, the habit begins to change. The mind still moves, but it does not take you with it. The past still appears, but it does not pull you in. The future still arises, but it does not create tension. Because you remain here, where nothing is happening that requires reaction, where nothing needs to be changed, where everything is already still. Let the mind move. Let it go where it goes. But stay, right here, in the body, in the breath, in this moment, and notice how everything begins to settle. Because the system is no longer being stretched across time. It is no longer carrying what has passed or preparing for what has not come. It is simply present, and in that presence, something deepens. A sense of stability, a sense of calm, a sense that nothing outside this moment needs your attention, because this moment is enough. Enough for the mind to rest, enough for the body to release, enough for the nervous system to finally slow down, without effort, without control, without needing to go anywhere else. Just here, fully at ease. And as the mind slowly stops traveling through time, something becomes clearer, not the thoughts themselves, but the quiet discomfort that appears when there are fewer of them. Because even when everything settles, even when the body softens, there can still be a subtle unease in the silence, a feeling that something is missing, a sense that the quiet should be filled, that something should be happening. This is where the mind reveals something deeper. It is not always comfortable with stillness, not because stillness is unsafe, but because stillness is unfamiliar. There is a part of the mind that has learned to stay active for a long time. It has been trained to think, to solve, to react, to move. It has rarely been given long periods of true quiet. And because of that, when stillness appears, it does not immediately feel like rest. It feels like uncertainty, as if something important is being overlooked, as if the absence of activity means something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. The mind simply does not recognize stillness yet. It treats it like a gap, something to fill, something to move away from. This is why, even in calm moments, there is an urge to think again, to create something, to engage with something, not because it is needed, but because it feels more familiar than being still. The Stoics understood this in a simple way. They knew that the mind becomes attached to its own activity, that it confuses movement with purpose, and that learning to be still requires patience, not force. As you lie here, notice what happens when the mind becomes quiet for a moment. Is there a slight tension, a subtle urge to think something, a feeling that the quiet should not last? That is the habit. The mind reaching for what it knows. But instead of following that urge, stay here, not holding on to the silence, not forcing it, just allowing it. Let the stillness exist, without needing to change it. At first, the mind may resist. It may create thoughts to fill the space. It may bring up something to engage with. That is okay. You do not need to stop it. You only need to not follow it. Stay where you are, in the quiet, and let the movement pass, without leaving with it. This is how the fear begins to fade, not by removing it, but by staying with it. Because fear often comes from unfamiliarity, and unfamiliarity changes with exposure. The more you remain in stillness without anything going wrong, the more the nervous system begins to understand. This is safe. This is allowed. This is not a problem. And slowly, the discomfort reduces. The urge to fill the space weakens. The quiet begins to feel different. Less empty, less uncertain, more stable, more supportive, more like rest. This is the shift, not in the silence itself, but in how it is experienced. What once felt like something to escape becomes something you can remain in. Not because you forced yourself to, but because the mind has learned that it does not need to move. The Stoics practiced this by returning to simplicity, by not adding unnecessary activity to the mind, by allowing things to be quiet without interference. And over time, that quiet became their foundation, not something they feared. You are building the same foundation now. Each moment you remain in stillness, the system learns. Each time you do not fill the space, the habit weakens. Each time you allow the quiet to exist, the fear reduces. And over time, something changes. The mind no longer feels the need to escape. The body no longer reacts to silence. The nervous system begins to settle more deeply. Because stillness is no longer unfamiliar, it becomes natural. Let the quiet stay, without adding anything, without reaching for anything, without leaving it. And notice how it begins to feel different. Not something to fill, not something to question, but something to rest in. Something that holds you, instead of something you need to manage. And in that, the mind begins to trust that it does not need constant movement, that it does not need constant activity, that it can be still and remain safe. And when that trust settles in, something deeper becomes possible. A calm that is not interrupted, a rest that is not resisted, a silence that is no longer feared, but welcomed, because it is no longer empty, it is full of everything the system has been needing: space, ease, and finally, peace. And as stillness begins to feel safe instead of unfamiliar, something else quietly shifts inside you. Not something loud, not something dramatic, but something firm. A quiet decision that you no longer have to follow every movement of the mind. Because chaos does not always come from outside. It grows from within, from the constant pull of thoughts, from the habit of reacting to everything, from the need to follow every feeling, every idea, every impulse, as if it demands your attention. And for a long time, this has felt normal, to be carried by the mind, to be pulled into whatever appears, to be moved without choosing. But something in you is beginning to step back, not forcefully, not aggressively, but clearly. This is where a silent rebellion begins, not against the world, but against the automatic patterns inside you. A refusal to be dragged by every thought, a refusal to be controlled by every reaction, a refusal to let inner chaos decide how you feel. This is not suppression. It is separation. The understanding that just because something appears in your mind does not mean it deserves your involvement. The Stoics lived by this principle. They knew that the mind can produce endless impressions, but that the self does not need to agree with them. That inner freedom begins the moment you stop automatically saying yes to everything that arises, and that freedom is quiet, almost invisible, but deeply powerful. As you rest here, notice the next movement of the mind, a thought, a feeling, a subtle impulse, and instead of following it, stay where you are. Do nothing with it. Do not respond. Do not engage. Just let it pass. This is the rebellion, not reacting, not continuing, not participating. At first, it may feel like something is missing, because the mind is used to being followed. It expects your attention, your reaction, your involvement. But when that does not come, something changes. The movement slows, the intensity reduces. Because without your participation, the chaos cannot sustain itself in the same way. You may notice that thoughts still arise. That is natural. The mind continues, but they feel different. Less demanding, less controlling, because they are no longer being fed. This is where the nervous system begins to shift again. It no longer reacts to every internal signal. It no longer prepares for every imagined scenario. It begins to settle, not because nothing is happening, but because nothing is being followed. This is a different kind of calm, not one that comes from controlling the mind, but one that comes from stepping out of its patterns. Let another thought appear, and again. Do nothing. Let it move without you moving with it. This may feel subtle, but it is powerful, because each moment of non-reaction weakens the habit of automatic engagement. Each moment of stillness strengthens your ability to remain separate. And over time, this becomes natural. The mind continues, but you are no longer inside it. You are aware of it, without being moved by it. This is what the Stoics called inner freedom, not the absence of thoughts, but the absence of control over you, the ability to remain steady, even when the mind is active. And as this deepens, something settles in the body, a quiet stability, a sense that you are no longer being pulled in different directions, because you are no longer following everything that appears. This is the rebellion, not loud, not visible, but real. A shift from being controlled to being aware, from being reactive to being still, from being inside the chaos to standing outside it. And in that position, everything changes. The mind becomes quieter, the body becomes lighter, the nervous system begins to rest more deeply, because there is no longer constant engagement, no longer constant movement, only awareness, only presence, only stillness. Let the mind do what it does. Let thoughts come and go, but remain where you are, unmoved, uninvolved, at ease. And as you stay in this space, something becomes clear. You do not need to fight chaos to be free from it. You only need to stop following it, and when that happens, the chaos loses its hold, not because it disappeared, but because you are no longer inside it. You are simply aware. And that awareness is enough. Enough to quiet the mind, enough to calm the body, enough to allow the nervous system to finally rest, without interruption, because nothing is pulling you anymore. Everything is passing, and you remain still. And as that quiet rebellion settles in, something becomes even clearer. Not just that you can step back from thoughts, but that you do not have to believe them. Because for a long time, every thought felt true, not because it was examined, but because it appeared. And anything that appeared in the mind was treated as something real, something important, something that deserved attention. A thought would come, and without noticing, it would be accepted, followed, carried. And over time, this created a kind of automatic trust, a trust that was never questioned. But not everything the mind produces is accurate. Not everything it says is useful, and most of it does not need to be believed. There is a difference between seeing a thought and agreeing with it, between noticing it and accepting it as truth. And this difference changes everything, because belief is what gives thoughts their weight. A thought without belief is light, temporary, passing. But a thought with belief becomes something else. It becomes a story, a direction, a feeling that spreads through the body. This is where disturbance begins. Not in the thought itself, but in the belief that follows it. The Stoics understood this clearly. They taught that the mind presents impressions, but that you have the choice to accept or reject them. Not every impression deserves agreement. Not every thought deserves to be taken seriously. This is the space you are entering now. A space where thoughts can appear without being believed. As you rest here, notice the next thought that comes. Do not stop it. Do not change it. Just see it. And then, instead of stepping into it, pause. Let it remain exactly as it is, without agreeing, without rejecting, without confirming it as true. Just let it exist. This may feel unusual, because the mind is used to moving quickly, from thought to belief, from appearance to acceptance. But now there is a gap, a small space, where the thought is seen, but not taken in. And in that space, something changes. The thought loses its authority. It becomes something you observe, not something that defines your reality. It may still appear, it may still pass through, but it no longer pulls you in the same way, because belief has not been added to it. Let another thought come, and again, do nothing with it. Do not decide if it is right or wrong. Do not analyze it. Do not follow it. Just see it, and let it pass. And slowly something begins to shift. The mind feels less convincing, less controlling, less heavy, because it is no longer being believed automatically. This is where freedom deepens, not from stopping thoughts, but from no longer trusting them blindly. The nervous system follows this change. It no longer reacts to every thought as if it is true. The body no longer tightens with every idea. The breath remains steady, even as thoughts pass through, because there is no belief turning them into something real. They are just movements, temporary, passing, without weight. The Stoics practiced this by questioning their impressions, but beyond questioning, there is something even quieter, the ability to not engage at all, to let thoughts be present without stepping into them, without believing them, without needing to know if they are true. This creates a kind of distance, a space where the mind continues, but you remain steady, unmoved, uninvolved. Let the next thought appear, and simply watch it, like something passing across your awareness. No agreement, no rejection, no belief, just observation. And in that observation, something becomes clear. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who sees them, and what you see does not need to control you. It only needs to be noticed, and then released, without belief, without attachment, without weight. And as this continues, the mind begins to quiet in a deeper way, not because it has stopped, but because nothing is being believed, nothing is being held, nothing is being turned into something more. Everything is passing, and you remain where you are, still, aware, free. And in that freedom, the nervous system settles even further, because there is nothing left to react to, nothing left to carry, only thoughts moving, without meaning, and a presence that remains untouched by them. Calm, steady, at rest, and as thoughts lose their power to pull you in, something steady begins to stand out. Not a thought, not a feeling, but something that has been with you the entire time. Quiet, constant, unnoticed. The breath. It has been there through everything, through tension, through overthinking, through moments of pressure and moments of calm. And yet, most of the time, it is ignored, taken for granted, or controlled without awareness. But the breath is more than just a function. It is a signal, a direct line between the mind and the body. A quiet anchor that tells the nervous system whether it is safe or not. There is a pattern many people do not notice. When the mind becomes active, the breath changes. It becomes shorter, faster, more controlled, as if the body is preparing for something, and the nervous system reads that signal clearly. It stays alert. It stays engaged, because the breath is telling it something is happening. But what if nothing is happening? What if the breath could send a different message? Not through force, not through control, but through awareness. As you lie here, begin to notice your breath. Not to change it, not to deepen it, just to feel it. Where does it move? Is it in the chest? In the stomach? Is it shallow? Is it soft? There is no right way, only what is already there. And as you observe it, something begins to happen. The breath becomes more natural, not because you adjusted it, but because it is being noticed. This is the first shift, from control to awareness. Now stay with it. Let your attention rest gently on the movement of the breath, the rise, the fall, the pause in between. No need to count, no need to guide it, just follow its natural rhythm. And as you do, the nervous system begins to receive a different signal. There is no urgency, there is no threat, there is no need to prepare, because the breath is soft, unforced, steady. This is how safety is communicated internally, not through words, but through signals. And the breath is one of the strongest signals the body understands. You may notice that as you stay with it, the breath slows slightly. It deepens on its own. It becomes quieter. And with that, the body responds. The muscles release. The heart rate steadies. The background tension fades. Because the system is no longer being told to stay alert. It is being told it can rest. This is what it means to reclaim the breath, not to control it, but to return to it, to allow it to guide you back into the present, back into the body, back into safety. The Stoics practiced returning to simple, steady anchors when the mind became disturbed, not to escape, but to reconnect. And the breath is the simplest anchor there is, always available, always present, always steady when allowed to be. If the mind begins to drift again, gently bring your attention back to the breath, not with effort, not with frustration, just a quiet return, again and again. And each time you return, the system settles a little more, because you are giving it something stable to rest on, something that does not change, something that does not demand anything, just the movement of air, in and out, nothing more. Let the breath carry your attention. Let it be the place you return to, when nothing else needs to be followed. And notice how everything begins to align around it. The mind becomes less scattered. The body becomes more at ease. The nervous system begins to reset more deeply. Because it is no longer being pulled in different directions, it is resting on something steady. This is not something you achieve. It is something you remember. The breath has always been here. You are simply returning to it. And in that return, something becomes clear. You do not need to search for calm. You do not need to create safety. You only need to reconnect with what is already there. Each breath, quiet, steady, uninterrupted. And as you stay with it, something deepens. A sense of grounding, a sense of presence, a sense that you are no longer drifting, but anchored, right here, in the body, in the breath, in this moment. And that is enough. Enough for the mind to quiet, enough for the body to release, enough for the nervous system to settle fully. Because you are no longer lost in thought. You are here, breathing, safe, at rest. And as the breath becomes steady, something else begins to soften beneath it. Not just tension, but emotion. Because when the body feels safe enough, what was held tightly inside starts to rise in quieter ways. One of those emotions is anger. Not always loud, not always explosive. Sometimes it appears as a subtle heat, a tightness, a quiet irritation that lingers longer than it should. And most people only know two ways to deal with it. They either express it, or they suppress it. They let it out, or they push it down. But both ways keep it active. Expression without awareness feeds it. Suppression without understanding traps it. And the cycle continues. But there is another way, a quieter way. One that does not involve fighting the anger or acting on it. The Stoics understood that anger is not something to fear, but something to observe. They saw it as a reaction, not a truth. A surge in the body, not a command that must be followed. And when it is seen that way, something begins to change. As you rest here, notice if there is any trace of anger in the body. It may not be obvious, it may be small, a slight tension, a feeling of resistance, a quiet memory that carries a bit of heat. Do not push it away, do not justify it, do not explain it, just notice it. Where is it in the body? Is it in the chest, the stomach, the jaw? Let your attention rest there, without trying to change anything. Because anger at its core is energy, a surge, a movement, and like all movement in the body, it is meant to pass. But it only passes when it is not resisted and not fed. If you suppress it, it stays. If you engage with it, it grows. But if you observe it, it moves. Stay with the sensation, not the story. The story will try to pull you back. It will bring reasons. It will bring justifications. It will remind you why the anger is there. But you do not need to follow that. Let the story remain in the background and stay with the feeling in the body, the heat, the tightness, the movement, without adding anything to it. This is where the shift happens, because when anger is separated from the story, it loses its direction. It is no longer pointed at anything. It becomes just sensation, just energy. And energy, when not directed, begins to dissolve. You may notice it change. It may soften. It may move. It may lose intensity. Not because you made it go away, but because you stopped holding it in place. The Stoics practiced this by stepping back from their first reaction. They would feel the emotion, but not act on it. They would observe it without letting it guide their behavior. And in that space, the emotion would pass. You are doing the same now. You are allowing anger to exist, without becoming part of it, without expressing it, without suppressing it, just letting it be, and then letting it move. The body begins to understand that it does not need to hold on to it, that it does not need to escalate it, that it can release it naturally. The breath remains steady, the muscles begin to soften, because there is no longer resistance, no longer engagement, only awareness. And in that awareness, the anger begins to lose its form. It becomes less defined, less sharp, less present, until it is no longer something you are holding. It is something that has passed through. This is the difference, not control, not avoidance, but understanding. The recognition that anger is not something you need to act on or hide from. It is something you can witness and allow to dissolve. Let whatever remains, remain, without touching it, without following it. And notice how it continues to change, because nothing in the body is meant to stay the same. Everything moves, everything shifts, everything passes when it is not held. And as it fades, something deeper returns, a sense of ease, a sense of lightness, a sense that the system is no longer carrying that heat, because it was never meant to be carried. It was only meant to move. And now, it has. Leaving behind a body that feels calmer, a mind that feels clearer, and a nervous system that is no longer reacting, but resting, quietly, fully, without the weight of what has already passed. And as the heat of anger begins to dissolve, something deeper remains. Not the emotion itself, but the story that was holding it together. Because beneath every strong feeling, there is often a quiet narrative repeating in the background. A version of what happened, a version of what it meant. A version of who you are because of it. And over time, these narratives become familiar, not because they are true, but because they have been repeated, again and again, until they start to feel like part of you. But they are not. They are patterns, constructed, reinforced, and often outdated. There are stories the mind keeps telling long after they are no longer needed. Stories about past mistakes, about how things should have been, about what others think, about what you deserve or do not deserve. And even when the situation has changed, the narrative stays, quietly shaping how you feel, quietly influencing how you respond. But not every story deserves to be carried forward. Some of them were only meant to help you make sense of a moment, not define your entire experience. The Stoics understood this in a simple way. They knew that we suffer not from events, but from the judgments we attach to them. And those judgments, when repeated enough, become narratives. Stories that feel real, but are not always accurate. This is where the shift begins. Not by forcing new beliefs, but by loosening your grip on the old ones. As you rest here, notice if there is any narrative quietly running in the background. It may not be loud. It may appear as a thought you have heard before, a familiar idea about yourself, a repeated interpretation of something that happened. Do not analyze it. Do not argue with it. Just notice it. And then step back. See it as a story, not as truth, not as identity, just something the mind has been repeating, and stay there, without stepping into it, without continuing it, without defending it. This is where the narrative begins to weaken, because it depends on your attention, it depends on your belief, it depends on your willingness to keep telling it. But when you stop participating, it starts to lose its structure. You may notice that it tries to return. That is natural. It has been reinforced for a long time, but each time it appears, you meet it the same way. You see it, you recognize it, and you let it pass, without continuing it. This is not about replacing it with something positive. It is about removing the need to hold on to it at all, because not every story needs to be rewritten. Some just need to be released. The body responds to this shift. The tension tied to that narrative begins to fade. The breath becomes lighter, because the system is no longer carrying a story that no longer serves it. There is no need to prove it, no need to fix it, no need to hold on to it. It can simply end. Here, without resistance. The Stoics practiced this by returning to what is real, not what is imagined. They would question the stories they told themselves, not to create new ones, but to see through them. You are doing the same now. You are seeing the narrative without stepping into it. And in that space, something opens, a sense of freedom, not from the past, but from the interpretation of it. Because when the story is no longer being held, the event loses its weight. It becomes something that happened without defining what comes next. Let the narrative remain in the background, without following it, without repeating it, without believing it, and notice how it begins to fade. Not completely, but enough. Enough for the mind to feel lighter, enough for the body to release, enough for the nervous system to settle, because nothing is being carried unnecessarily. Everything that no longer serves you is being set down, quietly, gently, without force. And in that release, something becomes clear. You do not need to hold on to every story your mind has created. You can let them pass, you can let them end. You can remain here without them. And in that space, rest deepens again, because nothing extra is being held. Nothing extra is being repeated. Everything is allowed to fall away, leaving only what is real, what is present, what is light, and finally, what is at peace. And as those old stories begin to fade into the background, something stronger starts to take shape. Not another thought, not another feeling, but a quiet stability beneath all of it. Because when you stop carrying what no longer serves you, there is nothing left for the mind to hold against you. There is a kind of strength most people misunderstand, They think it comes from control, from resisting, from building walls. But real strength is quieter than that. It is the ability to remain steady, even when something touches the mind. Not because nothing reaches you, but because nothing takes hold. This is what it means to become internally untouchable. Not cold, not distant, but free from being moved by everything that appears. There is a difference between experiencing something and being affected by it. Most people do not notice where that line is crossed. A thought appears, and it becomes personal. A memory returns, and it becomes heavy. A feeling rises, and it becomes something to carry. And just like that, the mind is no longer observing. It is involved. It is touched. But what happens when that involvement is no longer automatic? When something can appear without entering you? This is where the shift happens, not by blocking anything, but by not taking anything in. As you rest here, notice the next thing that arises: a thought, a sensation, a subtle movement in the mind. And instead of stepping into it, remain where you are. Let it come close, without letting it settle, like something passing by, without leaving a mark. This is not indifference. You are aware of it. You see it clearly. But you do not absorb it, and because of that, it cannot change your state. This is where the nervous system begins to feel something new, a sense of protection, without effort, because nothing is being allowed to enter deeply. Nothing is being held. Nothing is being turned into something personal. The Stoics practiced this by separating themselves from what was outside their control, but also from what was inside their mind. They did not attach to every thought or feeling. They allowed things to pass through without letting them define their state. This is that practice. Let another thought come. And again, do not take it in. Let another feeling arise. And again, do not carry it. Stay where you are, steady, unmoved. This may feel subtle at first, because the habit of involvement is strong. The mind is used to stepping into everything, to reacting, to engaging. But now, something is different. You are not following, you are not holding, you are not being pulled. And slowly, the distance grows. The thoughts feel further away. The sensations feel lighter, because they are no longer reaching the same depth. They are touching the surface, but not entering. This is where true calm begins to stabilize. Not because nothing appears, but because nothing stays. The body follows this shift. The tension reduces. The breath remains steady, because there is no longer constant internal impact. Nothing is disturbing the system from within. Everything is passing without leaving a trace. This is what makes you internally untouchable. Not resistance, not control, but non-absorption. The ability to remain as you are, regardless of what moves around you. Let everything continue. Let the mind do what it does, but remain where you are, unchanged, unmoved, uninvolved. And notice how the system responds. A deeper sense of ease, a quiet stability, a feeling that nothing can reach you in the same way. Because you are no longer open to everything, you are aware, without being affected. And in that space, something settles deeply. A calm that does not depend on circumstances, a steadiness that is not shaken by thoughts, a presence that remains, regardless of what appears. This is not something you force, it is something you allow, by not engaging, by not absorbing, by not stepping into what does not need to be carried. And as this becomes natural, something becomes clear. You do not need to protect yourself from every thought. You only need to stop taking them in. And when that happens, the mind becomes quiet. The body becomes light. The nervous system rests fully because nothing is touching you anymore. Everything is passing, and you remain. And as you begin to feel that quiet stability within you, something deeper starts to loosen. Not outside, but inside the very place where control has been living all along. Because even when everything becomes calm, there can still be a subtle effort holding things together. A quiet need to maintain the state, to keep the mind steady, to make sure nothing disturbs the calm you've found. And without noticing it, control returns in a softer form, but still present. There is a hidden layer in the mind that believes calm must be managed, that peace must be protected, that if you stop paying attention, something might go wrong again. But this is where true rest is interrupted, not by chaos, but by the effort to prevent it. The Stoics understood something most people resist, that control is often the source of tension, not because control is wrong, but because it is applied where it is not needed. They knew that trying to control everything creates more disturbance than letting things move naturally. And this is where the shift becomes deeper. Not in controlling less, but in letting go completely. Not of responsibility in life, but of control in this moment. As you lie here, notice if there is any subtle effort in the mind. A quiet attempt to stay calm, to keep things steady, to hold on to this state. It may feel small, almost invisible, but it is there. And instead of strengthening it, soften it. Let the need to control relax, not by force, but by permission. You do not need to maintain anything right now. You do not need to keep the mind quiet. You do not need to hold the body in a certain state. You can let everything move, without interference. This may feel unfamiliar, because control often feels like safety, but in this moment, safety does not come from control. It comes from trust. Trust that the body knows how to settle. Trust that the mind knows how to quiet. Trust that nothing needs to be managed for rest to happen. Let that trust take the place of effort. And notice what begins to change. The tension tied to holding things together starts to fade. The breath becomes even more natural because it is no longer being guided. The mind becomes quieter, not because you made it that way, but because nothing is being held in place. This is where something deeper opens, a kind of ease that cannot be created through control, only through release. The Stoics practiced this by accepting what was outside their control, but also by releasing the need to control what was already happening within them. They understood that peace is not something you enforce. It is something that appears when resistance and control fall away. You are doing the same now. You are letting go of the need to manage this moment, letting go of the need to keep things a certain way, letting go of the effort itself. And in that release, something shifts. The body drops into a deeper level of rest. The mind becomes lighter, because it is no longer being directed. Everything begins to move naturally, effortlessly, as it was meant to. Let whatever happens, happen without adjusting it, without guiding it, without trying to improve it. This is the ultimate form of control, not controlling anything. Because when you stop interfering, the system finds its own balance, without force, without pressure, without effort. And in that balance, something becomes clear. You were never meant to control every part of your internal world. You were only meant to stop disturbing it. And when that disturbance ends, everything settles, naturally, completely. Let go, even of letting go, and remain here, in a space where nothing is being held, nothing is being controlled, nothing is being forced, only allowed, only flowing, only resting. And in that space, the nervous system resets in its deepest form. because there is nothing left to manage, nothing left to protect, nothing left to hold. Only stillness, only ease. Only the quiet understanding that everything is already settling on its own, and you no longer need to do anything about it. And as the need to control begins to dissolve, something even more human begins to reveal itself. Not effort, not tension, but a quiet hesitation, as if a part of you is still waiting, waiting for the right moment, waiting for everything to be settled, waiting for a signal that it is finally okay to rest. Because even when the body is still, even when the mind is quieter, there can still be a subtle resistance underneath, not from stress, but from habit. The habit of staying ready, the habit of not fully letting go, the habit of holding just a little in case something is needed. This is where the nervous system pauses, not because it cannot rest, but because it has not been given permission to. For a long time, rest has felt conditional, something that comes after everything is done, after every task is completed, after every problem is solved, after every responsibility is handled. And because of that, the body learns to wait, to stay slightly active, to remain just alert enough in case it is needed again. But tonight, nothing is needed. There is no condition to meet, no task to complete, no problem to solve. And yet, the system may still hesitate. This is where something simple but powerful begins. Permission, not from outside, but from within. As you lie here, notice if there is any part of you still holding back. A slight tension, a quiet readiness, a subtle feeling that you should not fully let go yet. Do not fight it, just notice it, and then gently allow something new. You can rest, not because everything is perfect, but because this moment allows it. Let that settle in. You do not need to earn rest. You do not need to deserve it. You do not need to wait for anything else. Rest is already available, and the body only needs to feel that. You may notice a small shift, a softening, a slight release, because the nervous system is hearing something it rarely hears, that it can stop, that it can lower its guard, that it is not required to stay active. The Stoics understood that peace is not something granted by the outside world. It is something allowed from within. They did not wait for life to become quiet before they rested. They created that quiet by letting go of the need to stay prepared. You are doing the same now. You are giving the system permission to release, to soften, to rest fully. Let that permission move through the body, into the shoulders, the chest, the breath. Let each part receive it without forcing anything to change, and notice how the body responds. The tension reduces, the breath deepens naturally, the sense of holding begins to fade, because there is no longer a reason to stay alert, no longer a need to wait, no longer a condition to meet. This is what the nervous system has been waiting for, not perfection, not silence, but permission, the quiet understanding that it is safe to let go, safe to stop, safe to rest. And as this understanding settles in, something deeper begins to happen. The body drops into a more complete state of ease. The mind becomes less active, because there is no longer a need to monitor everything. Everything is already allowed. Stay here, in this permission, without questioning it, without pulling away from it, just letting it exist. And if the mind tries to bring you back into activity, gently return, not with effort, but with the same understanding. Nothing needs to be done, and you are allowed to rest, fully, completely, without holding anything back. Because rest is not something you wait for, it is something you allow. And now, it is allowed. And as that settles deeper, the nervous system begins to reset in a way that cannot be forced, because it is no longer being held. It is no longer waiting. It is simply resting. Within permission, within stillness, within a moment where nothing is required. And that is enough. And as the body begins to accept that it is finally allowed to rest, something else becomes possible. Not just releasing tension, but changing your relationship to it completely. Because even when stress appears, there is a way to no longer be available to it. Not by pushing it away, not by fighting it, but by no longer responding to it. There is a quiet pattern most people live inside without noticing. Stress arises, and immediately attention goes to it. It is checked, measured, followed. And in that moment of attention, something subtle happens. Connection. The mind connects with the stress. It begins to engage, to react, to build around it. And what was just a passing signal becomes something that grows. But what happens when that connection is no longer made? When stress appears and finds no response? This is where something shifts. Because stress does not sustain itself alone. It needs participation. It needs your attention, your reaction, your involvement. Without that, it weakens. This is what it means to become emotionally unavailable to your own stress. Not numb, not disconnected, but unwilling to engage. As you rest here, notice if there is any trace of stress in the body. It may be small, a slight tightness, a subtle pressure, a quiet restlessness. Do not try to remove it. Do not try to calm it. Just notice it. And then do nothing. Do not follow it. Do not give it attention beyond awareness. Let it exist without becoming part of it. This may feel unusual because the mind is used to responding, used to checking, used to reacting. But now something is different. You are not available. The signal is there, but no one is answering. And because of that, something begins to change. The stress loses its direction. It no longer grows. It no longer spreads. Because there is no engagement feeding it. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that emotional disturbance requires agreement, that stress only takes hold when we accept it, follow it, or resist it. But when it is simply observed, without reaction, it begins to dissolve. You are practicing that now. You are allowing the sensation without becoming involved, without giving it meaning, without turning it into something more. And as you do, the body begins to respond. The tightness softens, the pressure reduces, because the system is no longer being activated by your response. It is simply returning to balance. Let the stress remain where it is, without moving toward it, without moving away from it, just letting it exist on its own. And notice how it begins to fade. Not completely, not instantly, but gradually, because nothing is holding it in place. Nothing is feeding it. Nothing is reacting to it. This is where a deeper kind of calm appears, not one that depends on the absence of stress, but one that exists even when stress is present, because you are no longer available to it. It cannot reach you in the same way. It cannot pull you in. It cannot grow through you. It simply passes, like something that no longer has access. This is not something you force. It is something you allow by not engaging, by not responding, by not participating. And as this becomes natural, something changes. Stress may still appear, but it does not stay. It does not define your state. It does not control your body, because it no longer finds connection. You remain where you are, steady, unmoved, uninvolved. And in that space, the nervous system begins to rest more deeply. Because there is no longer a loop of reaction, no longer a cycle of engagement. only awareness, only presence, only the quiet understanding that not everything that appears deserves your attention. And in that understanding, something becomes clear. You do not need to remove stress to be free from it. You only need to stop responding to it. And when that happens, the body relaxes, the mind quiets, the system resets. Because nothing is being held, nothing is being followed. Everything is allowed to pass without reaching you, and you remain still, calm, untouched, at rest. And as you begin to feel what it means to not respond to stress, something else becomes easier to release. Not the feeling this time, but the expectation behind it. Because beneath most tension, there is a quiet attachment to how things should turn out. A need for things to go a certain way, to be resolved, to work out, to end in a way that feels right. And even when nothing is happening in this moment, that attachment can still sit quietly in the background, holding the body slightly tense, keeping the mind slightly active, as if it is waiting for the future to confirm something. But the future is not here. And yet, the body prepares for it anyway. This is where the nervous system stays engaged, not because of what is happening now, but because of what might happen later. The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that attachment to outcomes creates disturbance before anything has even occurred. That the more tightly we hold on to a result, the more the mind tries to control what cannot be controlled. And in that effort, tension grows. But what happens when the outcome is no longer held? When the need for things to turn out a certain way is released, even for a moment. This is where something shifts, not in the situation, but in you. As you lie here, notice if there is anything you are expecting, something you want to go well, something you are hoping for, something you are quietly waiting on. Do not analyze it. Just feel the attachment, the slight pull toward a specific result. And then gently loosen it, not by rejecting it, not by pretending it does not matter, but by allowing it to exist without holding on to it. Let the outcome be uncertain. Let it remain open. Let it unfold on its own, without needing to be controlled right now. This may feel uncomfortable at first, because the mind is used to securing things, to holding on to what it wants, to preparing for what might come. But right now, none of that is required. There is nothing you can do about the outcome in this moment. Nothing you can control, nothing you can finalize. And once that is seen clearly, something begins to soften. The pressure tied to that expectation starts to fade. The body releases the need to prepare. The breath becomes easier, because the system is no longer trying to manage something that does not exist yet. This is detachment, not indifference, not giving up, but releasing the need to control what is not here. The Stoics practiced this by focusing only on what was within their control and letting everything else unfold without resistance. They did not attach their peace to outcomes. They kept their state steady, regardless of what happened next. You are doing the same now. You are allowing the future to remain uncertain without needing to resolve it. Let whatever will happen, happen, without holding on to it, without trying to shape it, without needing it to be a certain way. And notice how the body responds. The tension reduces, the mind becomes quieter, because there is nothing left to prepare for, nothing left to secure, nothing left to hold. Everything that belongs to the future stays in the future, and what remains here is only this moment. Simple, still, complete. The nervous system begins to settle more deeply, because it is no longer being pulled forward, no longer reacting to imagined results. It is resting in what is real. And what is real requires nothing from you right now. Stay here, without reaching ahead, without holding on to what has not happened, just allowing everything to remain open. And in that openness, something becomes clear. You do not need to control the outcome to be at peace. You only need to stop carrying it into this moment. And when that happens, the mind releases, the body softens, the system resets. Because nothing is being held outside of what is here. Everything else is allowed to unfold on its own. And you remain calm, unattached, at rest. And as the grip on outcomes begins to loosen, something even deeper begins to settle. Not just the future, not just expectations, but the quiet tension between parts of you. Because even when everything outside feels distant, there can still be a subtle conflict within. A push in one direction, a pull in another. A thought that says one thing, and a feeling that says something else. And in that space, the mind begins to divide. Part of you wants to let go. Part of you wants to hold on. Part of you feels calm. Part of you still feels unsettled. And this inner opposition creates friction. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. A quiet resistance that keeps the system from fully resting. Because something inside is still arguing, trying to resolve, trying to choose, trying to settle what feels unsettled. But what if nothing inside needs to be resolved right now? What if both sides can exist without conflict? The Stoics understood that peace is not always found by choosing one side over another. Sometimes it is found by stepping back entirely, by no longer identifying with either position, by allowing both to exist without needing to fix them. This is where neutrality begins. Not in removing thoughts, not in eliminating feelings, but in no longer taking sides. As you rest here, notice if there is any inner tension, a disagreement within yourself, a part of you that feels one way and another that feels differently. Do not analyze it. Do not try to solve it. Just see it, and then step back. You do not need to decide anything right now. You do not need to resolve anything right now. Both sides can remain without conflict, because conflict only continues when you engage with it, when you try to choose, when you try to fix. But when you step out, something changes. The tension begins to soften, because there is no longer resistance between parts. There is only observation. This may feel unfamiliar, because the mind is used to solving, to finding clarity, to reaching a conclusion. But in this moment, clarity is not required. Resolution is not needed, only space. Let both sides be there, without choosing one, without rejecting the other, just allowing them to exist, without interaction. And notice how the body responds. The tightness begins to release. The pressure reduces, because the system is no longer holding a conflict. It is simply holding awareness. This is where neutrality takes form, not as emptiness, but as balance. A state where nothing is pulling against anything else, where everything is allowed without resistance. The Stoics practiced this by recognizing that internal struggle often comes from attachment. Attachment to being right, to having certainty, to resolving everything. And when that attachment is loosened, something deeper appears. Calm, not because everything is solved, but because nothing is being fought. You are doing the same now. You are allowing the inner space to remain open, without forcing alignment, without demanding resolution, just letting everything settle on its own. And as you do, something shifts. The mind becomes quieter, because it is no longer trying to reconcile opposing thoughts. The body becomes lighter, because it is no longer holding tension between different states. The nervous system begins to rest more deeply, because there is no longer internal resistance. Everything is simply there, without conflict, without friction, without pressure. Let that neutrality deepen. Let it spread through the body, through the breath, through the mind, and notice how it feels. Not forced, not created, but revealed when nothing is being opposed. This is where true calm begins to stabilize, not from having answers, not from resolving everything, but from no longer needing to. And in that space, something becomes clear. You do not need to fix every part of yourself to be at peace. You only need to stop fighting what is already there. And when that happens, the system settles, naturally, completely, without effort, because nothing is in conflict anymore. Everything is allowed, everything is neutral, and in that neutrality, you finally rest. And now, notice what has changed. Not everything outside, not your life, not your responsibilities, but something far more important, the way you carry all of it. You began by loosening the weight you didn't even know you were holding. You learned that your body remembers what your mind avoids, and that true rest begins when you stop running from yourself. You stepped out of the habit of reacting, fixing, judging, and controlling, and into something quieter. You stopped fighting your thoughts, and they softened. You stopped feeding emotional noise, and it moved into the background. You stopped believing everything your mind said, and space appeared. You allowed discomfort to pass, without escaping it. You let the past remain in the past, without dragging it forward. You released the need to solve everything, and discovered nothing needed solving right now. You stopped time traveling. You stopped chasing outcomes. You stopped trying to control what was already settling on its own. And somewhere in that process, something reset. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Your breath became your anchor. Your mind became lighter. Your nervous system stopped bracing and started resting. You became still without fear, untouched without effort, at peace without needing anything to change. And that is the quiet power of this practice. Not escape from life, but a return to yourself. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, carry nothing with you. Not the day, not the noise, not the pressure, just this calm that you created by letting go. And if something in you feels different, even slightly, leave a comment and write, "I let it go." That one sentence is not just a comment, it's a decision. And if this gave you something real, something you can return to again and again, subscribe to the channel, because this is where you come back to reset your mind, reclaim your calm, and remember who you are beneath the noise. Rest now, you've done enough.